Chapter 1051. But father, the young Marquis Wang Chong is the son of Heaven's disciple, and his grandfather Duke Jiao is a man of virtue and prestige, renowned throughout the world. Moreover, in the War of the Southwest, the young Marquis used up all his wealth to hire several thousand soldiers and brave enormous risks to enter the Southwest. In the end, he turned the tide and saved the common people of the Southwest from disaster. Is such a loyal subject not worthy of our Yuchi clan's help? Yuchi-fan clutched his swollen face, still wanting to argue. Bastard. The winner takes all. Today, the Wang clan is a loyal subject. But how do you know that the Wang clan will not be traitors and traitors in the future? Moreover, our Yuchi clan's ultimate martial army only serves the country. If we are used by the Wang clan, and the outside world thinks that our Yuchi clan is colluding with the Wang clan, there will be another wave of chaos. When that time comes, do you think our Yuchi clan will still have a future? Will we be pardoned by the Holy Emperor like last time? The Yuchi clan patriarch's eyes were sharp and fierce. Yuchi-fan's expression froze, momentarily speechless. Evil spawn, get out of my sight. The Yuchi clan patriarch angrily said. Enough. At this moment, an elderly voice came from the ground, echoing through the hall. Both the Yuchi clan patriarch and Yuchi-fan were alarmed by this voice. The Yuchi clan patriarch's face was tinged with awe, but Yuchi-fan's face was overjoyed, as if he had found his savior. Grandpa Zeng. Funner is right. The elderly voice said. Ancestor. The Yuchi clan patriarch couldn't help but grimace. Funner, Grandpa Zeng asks you. You said that Wang Chong is Duke Jiao's descendant, and that he is both loyal and righteous. Is this true? The aged voice continued to echo in the ears of the father and son like thunder. Grandpa Zeng, it is absolutely true. Yuchi-fan sternly said. Grandpa Zeng understands. Yuchi-fan, bring that letter over. I want to take a look. The elderly voice was dignified and dignified. Yes, ancestor. The Yuchi clan patriarch hesitated, but in the end, he could not go against the will of his ancestor. A few days later, at night, in the backyard of the Yuchi mansion, Hong Long, the ground suddenly split open, revealing a huge underground tunnel. In the next second, squads of black-armored soldiers charged out on horseback. Each of the cavalrymen exuded a sharp and capable aura, giving off the feeling that they were like unsheathed longswords, ready to slash out at any moment. Their auras were swift and fierce, but there was no lack of heaviness, giving off a feeling of great power. The strangest thing was the helmet of the cavalrymen. All of the black-armored cavalrymen were wearing cold and cruel masks on their faces. Go! The leader of the ultimate martial army urged his horse's abdomen and galloped away, disappearing into the night with the 2,000 soldiers behind him. Time slowly passed. The Tang dynasty, the Uzun Empire, the Western Turkic Khaganate and Arabia. 4 empires, 4 powers. All fought for every second they had to strengthen themselves in this war. Talas grew more and more dangerous by the day, but none of the 4 empires showed any intention of withdrawing their soldiers or giving up. A storm was brewing. Everyone knew that Talas had become a barrel of gunpowder, but no one knew when it would explode. In the distant Arabian Empire, in Khorasan, hailed as the Pearl of the East, the clanging of metal could be heard day and night. Flames and smoke were the most striking symbols of the city. Every day, a large amount of meteoric star metal armor would be forged and put on the bodies of the most elite Mamelukes. This was the most powerful army of the Arabian Empire, and every day, it was evolving in its own way, growing more and more terrifying and valiant. Rumble. In the Lord's residence of Khorasan, while countless Arab craftsmen were furiously forging around the clock, the earth suddenly quaked, and an intense tremor came from the west. The trembling was mixed with the neighing of countless war horses and the furious bellows of cavalry. Countless cavalry were currently making their way toward Khorasan. This noise caused the craftsmen to fall into disarray. Several rebellions had taken place in Khorasan, and even now, the Mamelukes were still trying to capture the remnants of the Sassanid dynasty. No one knew if these remnants of the Sassanid dynasty were coming for them or not. These soldiers loathed the Arabs, and the top-class weaponsmiths who represented the might of Arabia were also their targets. Clang! Clang! With a clattering of metal, the Mamelukes on guard swiftly took action. Withdraw! At this moment, the city lord's mansion shook violently, and a figure with a straight back quickly walked out from inside. Mamluk Commander Ibak looked in the direction of the galloping horses, a faint smile on his lips. This is Osman bringing his army over. All the craftsmen were at first stunned by these words, but they quickly calmed down. At Ibak's signal, the surrounding Mamelukes dispersed. Osman was the governor of Cairo, one of the most powerful governors of the Arabian Empire. He had clearly appeared in Khorasan to join up with the Mamelukes suppressed here, and go to Talas to deal with the Tang at Talas. Although I'm a little late, I'm not too late, Ibak muttered to himself, a faint smile on his lips. Nay! At this moment, the heaven-shaking neigh of a warhorse broke the silence as it galloped over Khorasan like a bolt of lightning. Wang! The warhorse's long neigh had just stopped when the west side of the sky suddenly turned bright red, as if it was on fire. And in this bright red light, a powerful and terrifying aura suddenly appeared in everyone's perception like a storm. Ha ha ha, Ibak, the Tang people of Talas, do you also want a piece of the pie? This thunderous voice shook all of Khorasan. As this voice faded away, Ibak could clearly see a muscular figure with a reddish-brown beard, riding a black steed that was taller than a man. He was like a demon god that had emerged from the underworld as he galloped toward him. Behind him was a powerful and well-equipped army that was surging toward him, like an apocalyptic flood. Ha ha ha, Osman, I've come on orders. You wouldn't dare to question the orders of the caliph and the high priest, would you? Ibak laughed, a tyrannical aura erupting from his body like a volcano. With Ibak at the center, the earth for a radius of 100 li quaked, and even space twisted. His aura was not one bit inferior to Osman's. In the distance, Osman's eyes were like a tiger's, exuding an intimidating light as he galloped forward with astonishing speed. A few moments later, Osman, riding a black steed taller than a man, appeared outside the Lord of Talas's residence like a god. The air surged and a giant black cloak fluttered behind Osman. It made his originally tall and sturdy figure appear even taller and more imposing. Haha, Ibak, it seems like we'll be working together again. Osman looked down at Ibak on the distant steps and chuckled. Correct. But this time, our goal is no longer Khorasan, but the greater goal of the East, the vaster world. This time we will conquer the entire East. Osman, welcome. Ibak smiled. Osman heartily laughed as he urged his horse forward. Dismounting, he hugged Ibak from the steps. The three conquerors of the Arabian Empire, that had destroyed the ancient Khorasan dynasty, had gathered this time. The horns of war had already sounded, and with Osman's arrival, 10,000 Mamelukes and more than 100,000 Ottoman soldiers had gathered in Khorasan. This important city of the East had become a military stronghold worthy of its name. With Osman's arrival, the Arabian Empire's massive war machine began to move. In a place that no one could see, another massive army was moving at astonishing speed from Tarsus in the north to the Pearl of Khorasan in the east. The departure of this army's commander had alarmed the entire Arabian Empire. Even the Caliph of the Arabian Empire was keeping a close eye on the movements of this army. This was a black war banner blazing with hellfire, and beneath the black flames was a continent on the verge of collapse. In the Arabian Empire, this war banner was famous because it represented a single person, the most illustrious governor of Arabia, governor of war Qutayba. In the Arabian Empire, this was a name that was even more famous than the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim, the governor of Cairo Osman, and the Mamluk commander Ibak, the three conquerors of the ancient Khorasan dynasty. In the Arabian Empire, this was the governor who had fought the most battles, killed the most experts, and destroyed the most empires. If not for the fact that the Caliph of Arabia had sent the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim, the governor of Cairo Osman, and the Mamluk commander Ibak, as well as Qutayba to the north, it would have been Qutayba conquering Khorasan, not Abu Muslim and the others. The title of three conquerors would have ceased to exist. Chapter 1052. The mood in Khorasan was growing more and more tense, and all of Arabia was slowly gathering around that person. 10 days later, the final flood of 150,000 soldiers appeared in Khorasan, still brimming with the flames of war. Buzz! At this moment, when the white warhorse and the dazzling golden figure appeared, even Ibak and Osman couldn't help but feel a little stifled, a hint of apprehension appearing on their faces. Let's go! That godly figure was covered in thick golden armor, and his icy voice came from beneath his visor. He lightly urged his horse forward, and without a moment's delay, he rode through Khorasan toward the Black Forest and the distant Talas. Behind him the tide surged. Countless cavalrymen surged forward like the most devout servants, following behind that person and charging forward. As the Arab army left Khorasan for the front lines, countless falcons and messenger birds flew in every direction. Within the Arabian Empire, countless nobles, governors, generals, and even the caliph in Baghdad were paying close attention to this unprecedented expedition to the east. Flap flap. An Arabian hunting falcon shot down from the Uzun camp and landed on Dalwan Ruozan's outstretched arm. Haha, so fast. They're finally moving out. A faint smile appeared on Dalwan Ruozan's lips as he gazed at the letter in his hand. The letter had been sent from Abu Muslim from the Black Forest. More than 300,000 Arab reinforcements, 2 governors, and the tens of thousands of Arab militias they had recruited along the way. This was an unprecedented Arab army marching toward the Black Forest. This was a force so powerful that it could no longer affect a war on the level of the Battle of Talas. It could even affect the entire East, including the Tang dynasty. Perhaps I should change my goal. Perhaps I'll be able to complete the conquest of the Central Plains in one go. A bright light flashed through Dalwan Ruozan's eyes, and he immediately crushed Abu Muslim's letter into powder. 400,000 elite Tang cavalry, and the reinforcements that had arrived from Uzun brought together a total of 500,000 soldiers, including 7 imperial great general experts. This strength far surpassed that of the Mengshi, Yusang army on the shores of the Arai. In Dalwan Ruozan's entire life, he had never built such a powerful army. Informed Wuxia to assemble the army and prepare for battle. Dalwan Ruozan turned his head and said to the orderly beside him, "Yes." The messenger received the order and immediately flew away. Dalwan Ruozan watched him disappear into the distance before slowly turning to the 2 great generals at his side. "Are you ready for the final battle?" Huashu Wazong and Dusong Mangpoch said nothing, only firmly nodding their heads, their eyes glimmering with determination. Both of them understood what Dalwan Ruozan meant. This was the final battle. If they wanted to defeat the Tang dynasty and change the ratio of strength between the Tang dynasty and Uzun, this was their last chance. If they did not succeed, they would die trying. Summon the army. With Dalwan Ruozan's final order, a storm erupted from the Uzun camp to the west of Talas, engulfing the entire world. This was bound to be a war that would shake the entire eastern world. Crackle, crack. As the Uzun army began to move, a thick bolt of lightning shot over the Uzun camp. For a moment, dark clouds roiled, and the atmosphere in Talas grew even tenser. A few moments later, a hunting falcon descended from the sky. Wang Chong had also received a message from the Khorasani. It was the Arabs. The contents of the letter caused Wang Chong's heart to sink. The day had finally arrived. Governor Qutayba of Tarsus, Governor Osman of Cairo, and the elite Mamelukes of the Arabian Empire, an army of 300,000 to 400,000 soldiers, were currently making their way to Talas. This fated battle had finally begun. Give this letter to Protector General Gao Xianji. Pass on my order to prepare for battle. After saying this, Wang Chong walked out of his room and gazed at the second training ground on the west side of Talas. Boom! A series of shouts were heard. In an instant, the airflow was turbulent. In the sky above the second training ground, a surging aura covered the sky and earth. And within this invisible aura, there were tens of thousands of long and magnificent saber marks. After a long month, the MO Saber unit had finally taken shape. The atmosphere in Talas instantly became tense and hostile. But the influence of this battle was not limited to just Talas. In the southeast of the Great Tang, in a famous mountain range, ancient trees grew densely along the undulating terrain, covering the entire mountain range. This was an enormous mountain range that spanned 160 to 70 kilometers. Wild beasts roamed the area, and it was extremely remote. Under normal circumstances, no one would come to this place. However, for some people, this protruding mountain range was like a holy land. Grandpa, have you found the dragon head and the dragon cave? In the lush forest, a crisp and tender voice rang out. Taking a closer look, Zhang Xian saw a 7 or 8-year-old child with a long beard riding on a large green ox in a lush bush. The ox's fur was glossy, and stellar energy flowed through its body. It was clearly not an ordinary animal. Haha, soon. Right in front of the little boy was an azure-clothed old man with 3 strands of immortal beard. He held a bronze compass in one hand while stroking his beard with the other, and his gaze ceaselessly sized up the surroundings while he seemed to be full of vigor and energy, as if he was in command of the world. A fortune teller of geomancy, a plainclothed fortune teller. In the Tang dynasty, there was a group of warlocks who studied geomancy and geography, as well as the direction of the draconic energy of the earth. They were called mystic scholars. They usually hid themselves and rarely showed themselves to others. They would only come out at certain times, and most of the time, they would spend their time observing the landscape and the draconic energy of the 9 continents. Haha, found it. A moment later, the compass on the bronze compass trembled and pointed in a direction. Almost at the same time, the sage-like old man in green suddenly smiled. He extended a finger and looked at a cliff in the distance that was shrouded in clouds and had a strange terrain. Looking from afar, this cliff just happened to be like a huge dragon head lying on the ground, snoring away. Grandpa, did we really find it? Are we going to build a Taoist monastery here in the future? The child said in a childish voice. Ha, little Yin, that's right. When Grandpa finds the dragon cave, we'll build a wooden house here and guard the entire dragon vein. What do you think? The azure-robed elder turned back and pinched the child's chubby cheeks lovingly. Buzz! Just as the grandfather and grandson were talking, there was a sudden change. Rumble! The huge cliff in the distance that looked like a dragon head suddenly shook, and rocks kept rolling down the mountain. The white mist shrouding the mountain suddenly seemed to be hit by something. It fluttered and quickly dissipated. What's going on? The elder turned back and was shocked. He was completely stunned. The dragon head was where the spirit energy of the dragon vein was. This kind of dragon vein would not easily change for hundreds or even thousands of years, let alone such a drastic change. Grandpa! Suddenly, the child on the ox's back seemed to have discovered something. He pointed at the bronze compass in the elder's hand and said with his eyes wide open. The elder was stunned. He lowered his head and found that the needle of the compass in his hand had suddenly spun crazily. Boom! At this moment, an earth-shattering sound was heard. Under the gazes of the old man and the young man, the cliff where the dragon's head was located suddenly collapsed. Like sand, the entire thing fell down. The dragon vein is moving. How is this possible? The azure-robed elder's heart palpitated as if he was struck by lightning. There were many ancient mountain ranges in the land of the 9 prefectures. Only an extremely small number of large mountain ranges could be called dragon veins. These dragon veins would not change at all for hundreds of years. The phenomenon of a dragon returning to the sky was extremely rare. Every time it happened, it meant that the land of the 9 prefectures would undergo a huge change. Roar! Just as this thought flashed through the azure-robed elder's mind, an earth-shattering dragon roar came from the void in the next moment. The place where the dragon head had collapsed was filled with dust. Not only did the dust not fall down, but under the influence of an invisible force, it surged into the sky. Very soon, an even more shocking change occurred. Under the shocked gazes of the azure-robed elder and the child, a huge dragon suddenly stretched out from the mountain range. It raised its head and rose from the ground. This dragon was formed from endless dust, sand, and spiritual energy of the world. The dragon's horns, eyes, scales, tail. Everything was vivid and lifelike. In front of this huge dragon, the azure-robed elder and the child standing on the mountain were as small as ants. The wind howled, and endless storms surged in all directions. Under the effect of this violent force, all the trees and rocks trembled violently. Countless birds suddenly flew into the sky, and many beasts also seemed to be frightened. They rushed out of the forest and ran in all directions. At this very moment, the entire world was trembling violently in the face of this dragon-shaped pressure. At that moment, even the 7 or 8-year-old child on the back of the green ox forgot his fear. His gaze was fixed on the void like the azure-robed elder, and even his breathing almost stopped. In the sky, the huge dragon formed from the earth's dragon energy looked up at the sky. It was struggling and roaring, as if it was enduring great pain. "Grandpa, why is a dragon in pain?" The pituitary boy stared blankly at the sky. He had received many books on geomancy and dragon veins since he was young, but none of the books, including what his grandfather had taught him, had mentioned anything about the phenomenon before his eyes. However, the azure-robed elder's heart was in turmoil. He could no longer hear the child's voice. There was only one voice left in his heart. The dragon returns in 100 years, and the divine land changes in 1,000 years. Chapter 1053. There were a total of 9 giant dragon veins on the earth, representing the Tang dynasty of the Middle Plains, and the fortune of the entire divine prefecture for 1,000 years. Such a scene would only appear when the heavens changed, and there was a great change. The dragon form of the dragon vein could sense the impending danger. Its pain and roar only meant one thing. The divine prefecture was about to change, and a great catastrophe was about to come. How can this be? The divine prefecture is in trouble. The divine prefecture is in trouble. I must leave and inform the sect as soon as possible, as well as the imperial family of the Tang dynasty. The green-robed elder felt a chill in his heart. With a sway of his body, he suddenly picked up the child on the back of the green ox and disappeared without a trace. The dragon veins of the 9 states were not the only ones who sensed this danger. Under the starry night, in the imperial palace of the Tang dynasty, on the observatory of the Northern Imperial Observatory, on the huge sun-shaped observatory, an elder dressed in a luxurious dark blue robe sat motionlessly on the observatory, as if he had become one with the entire observatory. The elder's hair and beard were all white, and he had the air of an immortal. Around him, specks of light that looked like stars floated in the night sky, making the elder's silhouette look incomparably mysterious. And if one looked closely, they would discover that the specks of light around the elder were faintly resonating with the stars in the sky, revealing a profound truth. The elder seemed to have been petrified, and he did not move at all. After an unknown period of time, boom, a violent wind surged, as if struck by an invisible force. The old man's body suddenly trembled, and the starlight around him suddenly dimmed, fluctuating violently. Some of the starlight even directly fell from the sky, disappearing into nothingness. The heavens changed. The stars are in chaos. How is this possible? How is this possible? On the observatory, the elder suddenly opened his eyes. His pupils contracted as he looked at the sky, his eyes filled with disbelief. Following the elder's gaze, he saw that the starlight in the sky was changing, faintly revealing a sense of chaos. But in the elder's eyes, this was not the case at all. The crepe myrtle star is moving, the Taiyuan star is moving. All the stars in the sky are dimming. This is the chaos of the divine prefecture, a calamity for the 9 states. The elder's hair and beard trembled violently. Let me see where cholera is coming from. The old man straightened his body and formed a spell with his right hand. The 5 fingers on his left hand seemed to have a life of their own, constantly moving and changing, deducing and calculating at an astonishing speed. Wang, just as the old man was deducing, a deep and unparalleled power suddenly burst forth from the old man's body. With the old man as the center, the huge stargazing platform changed violently, and a huge astrolabe appeared first. As the astrolabe rotated, it emitted a sound that seemed to be condensed from solid steel. At the same time, in the dim light around the old man, all the stars in the sky appeared at the same time, and according to their own rules, they moved at a speed 100 times faster than normal. The old man's white eyebrows trembled. His eyelids drooped slightly as he mumbled to himself. He was completely immersed in the world of divination. In just a moment, all the illusions disappeared. The old man suddenly opened his eyes. His bright eyes looked toward the sky above the northwestern defensive line. The stars in the sky were normal, But the old man's gaze had long since pierced through the layers of starry sky and landed on a huge star that was isolated from the rest. Talas. On the stargazing platform, the old man's fingers suddenly froze, only one thought remaining in his mind. How? That place is so far from the capital. The old man was stunned, and then he began to calculate once more. Gao Xinji, Wang Chong, Arabia. Countless thoughts flashed through the old man's mind, and many images appeared in his mind. When the old man reached the deepest part of his calculations, his body suddenly trembled, and he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. Not good. Talas is in trouble. This battle will affect the fortune of the Tang dynasty for the next 1,000 years. And all of this is only the beginning of an even greater calamity. I must tell His Majesty as quickly as possible that the Tang dynasty is in trouble. The blood on the old man's beard was a ghastly sight, but he stood up from the stargazing platform, not even bothering to wipe his beard, before hurrying into the inner courtyard of the imperial palace. The rising of the 9 provinces and the strange changes in the eastern lands were constantly being transmitted to the imperial palace, but all the news was suppressed. Deep into the night, galloping sounds could be heard as a warhorse galloped through the palace gates, galloping towards the depths of the imperial palace. It was forbidden to ride horses in the imperial palace, but the sight of that majestic Tongluo steed and that golden dragon token caused all the palace gates to open. Only one person in the entire imperial city possessed this token. The Tongluo Great General Abusi. The Tongluo clan had served the imperial clan for more than 200 years, and the Tongluo clan was loyal and devoted to the Tang dynasty. Because of this loyalty and their astonishing feats in the past, Abusi, the Tongluo chief, had been given a token and a special honor, allowing him to gallop freely through the imperial palace. This was a privilege that not even the scions of the Tang dynasty could enjoy. A few moments later, Abusi had passed through the palace and appeared in front of that lofty hall that represented the center of power of the Tang dynasty. This lowly subject Abusi kowtows in salute to Holy Emperor. What decree does Holy Emperor have? This lowly subject will go through fire and water with all his might. Abusi leapt off his horse and dashed up the stairs. He lowered his head and knelt heavily in front of the hall. Abusi's expression was extremely solemn. Everyone knew that the holder of that golden dragon token possessed supreme authority and could even ride a horse through the imperial palace in the middle of the night. But only the Tongluo clan knew that only members of the Tongluo clan could use it when an extremely important matter occurred. This did not represent glory, but a duty and a mission. It represented the Tongluo clan's loyalty to the imperial clan and an ancient agreement. The hall was quiet. After a long time, a voice came from inside. Abusi, we have an important matter to entrust to you. Your divine holiness, please instruct me. Abusi's expression chilled, and his head drooped even lower. Tongluo clan immediately dispatched 6,000 soldiers to Talas. The Holy Emperor's voice drifted out of the hall. Yes. Abusi's pupils constricted. The Tongluo clan had served the imperial clan for centuries and rarely left the capital, spending the majority of their time guarding the imperial capital. But when he heard the Holy Emperor's words, Abusi immediately responded without hesitation. This lowly subject receives the decree. This lowly subject will immediately lead the Tongluo cavalry to the northwest and fight with Lord Gao against the Arabs. There was no one who did not know of the events at Talas. Although Abusi had clashed with Wang Chong during the regional commander's incident, Abusi would never disobey an order from the Holy Emperor. Whether it was Wang Chong or anyone else, the Tongluo clan had sworn an oath to the imperial clan. There is no need. We only need you to dispatch 6,000 Tongluo cavalry to escort something for us. The Holy Emperor's majestic voice resounded through the hall. Abusi's expression froze as he finally raised his head. He had never imagined that the Holy Emperor had only sent him to escort a single item. Go! The Holy Emperor's voice resounded through the hall. Bizizi, Bizizi. In the next moment, the entire palace rumbled, and right before Abusi's eyes, a massive foot covered in thick armor suddenly stepped out of the palace doors. This guard was dressed in thick armor that made him seem like a monster. Ordinary guards were not even a third of his size. His entire body was shrouded in thick armor, and even his face was covered in a monstrous mask. Wuxia swore that in all his years of service in the palace, he had never seen this guard before. His body was shrouded in a thick aura of darkness, and even with Wuxia's cultivation, he was unable to see through him. However, this was not what shocked Wuxia the most. What shocked him the most was the long war flag in the monstrous guard's hand. This war banner was as tall as 2 people, and as thick as a wrist. It was forged from deep-sea Xian iron, and some other unknown metal. And what drew Wuxia's attention the most was the massive banner on the pole. The war banner was red and black, so red that it seemed to be dripping with blood. The surface of the banner was mottled and old, a clear indication that it had existed for a very long time. Most inconceivable of all was that Wuxia could sense a pure and thick flow of stellar energy from the banner. The nature of this stellar energy was enough to make an imperial great general like Wuxia pale in comparison. Wuxia's heart skipped a beat, and a thought flashed through his mind. His mouth opened, but he did not say anything, and he quickly lowered his head. I didn't think that His Majesty would take out this war banner. At this moment, Wuxia's heart was in turmoil, like a raging storm. Rumble. Several hours later, the earth quaked as 6,000 Tongluo cavalry escorted a black-armored guard out of the capital for the first time to the distant Talas. At the same time, while the 6,000 Tongluo cavalry were leaving the capital for Qixi, in the northern part of the empire, in the distant western Turkic steppe, a battle was brewing. Ready! A loud voice resounded over the plateau. On the ground, tens of thousands of soldiers of the biting Protectorate army had formed a long human wall. Behind this human wall were countless shieldmen, spearmen, infantry, axemen and archers, as well as a vast sea of cavalry. All the cavalry were neatly arranged, ready to attack at any moment. Across from them were even more Western Turkic cavalry. All of them unsheathed their sabers as they stared at the biting Protectorate army, their eyes seething with killing intent. Battle could break out at any moment, and the air was fraught with tension. Finally, boom. Chapter 1054. Kill them all. For all the shepherds. The steppe will forever be the steppe of us Turks. Since you want to fight, we'll fulfill your wish. Waves of roars shook the heavens and the earth. The Western Turkic Khaganate, and the biting Protectorate army, had always maintained relative restraint. Although there were battles every year, the intensity of the battles were not very high. This time, the biting Protectorate army had actually left its base and penetrated deep into the Turkic steppe. With just 100,000 soldiers, it dared to sweep through the most fertile habitat of the Turkic steppe. Even Ishbara Khagan had been infuriated by Insishuan's arrogance and ambition, and he had ordered the Turkic army, guarding the south of the Western Turkic Khaganate, to press forward and encircle Insishun. A portion of the Western Turkic cavalry charged at the biting Protectorate army from the front, while the other portion split into 2, flanking the biting Protectorate army's flanks and circling to its rear. This was a classic tactic of the Western Turkic Khaganate. As long as the biting Protectorate army penetrated deep into the steppe, they would find a way to attack from the rear. Kill. In a few short moments, the army of the Western Turkic Khaganate crashed into the biting Protectorate army's defense line, like a tidal wave weighing 10,000 tons. The earth rumbled, and the heavens and earth seemed to lose their color. Countless Tang dynasty infantry were sent flying by the charge of the cavalry. But at almost the same time, all the soldiers of the biting Protectorate army responded. Axemen, spearmen, archers, cavalrymen. Everyone charged out together. At that moment, the sound of metal clashing rang out as countless soldiers fiercely fought against each other. Clang, clang, clang. Cold light flashed, and the sound of metal clashing rang out incessantly. Insishun, you're too conceited. I'd like to see just how your 100,000 soldiers deal with my 180,000 cavalry. Right at the back of the army, there was a figure standing straight like a mountain. His eyes shone with a sharp light, and his every movement exuded a powerful deterrent. This enormous aura was suffocating. Sami, Great General. He was one of the top 3 great generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate, and his gaze was sharp and his status was no less than Dewusley's. Dewusley had been transferred to the northwest to take part in the Battle of Talas, while Sami Great General Judafulua had been transferred by Ishbara Khagan to the southern part of the Turkic steppe to deal with the Tang dynasty army, commanded by Biting Protector General in Sisihun. This wasn't Judafulua's first time fighting in Sisihun. The two of them were already very familiar with each other. Although he didn't understand why a great general like in Sisihun would leave the base and venture deep into the Turkic steppe, there was no doubt that this was an excellent chance to wipe out the Biting Protectorate. In addition, Judafulua had already sent scouts to investigate and found that there were no reinforcements behind in Sisihun. This was simply seeking death. Boom! In the distance, just as the Western Turkic cavalry were suppressing the Biting Protectorate army with their absolute advantage, there was a sudden rumble, mixed with the sounds of gears turning. Before Judafulua could react, he heard screams in his ears. A blurry silhouette flashed through the air. 7 or 8 Western Turkic soldiers charging in a straight line suddenly had blood spurting out of their chests and dropped from their horses. Tang Dynasty Ballisti. Judafulua was alarmed as he instantly recognized them, and an extremely bad feeling welled up in his heart. He had carefully investigated and found that in Sichuan's army didn't have many Tang Dynasty Ballisti, and there was no way they could fire so accurately. This was not the style of the Biting Protectorate army, but a moment later, Judafulua's mind went into a frenzy. In the center of the Biting Protectorate army, the cloth covering the supply carts was suddenly undone, revealing not sacks of grain, but the famous war machines of the Tang dynasty, ballisti. Fire! In the center of these ballisti, a young officer with a cold and aloof expression swung down his Wuxia steel sword. In a flash, the 5,000 Tang dynasty ballisti all fired. Boom! 5,000 ballista bolts exploded through the air like a storm, and time seemed to stop for a moment. What happened next caused the hearts of the 180,000 Turkic cavalry to turn cold, as if they had been plunged into an icehouse. Bum bum bum. In a single volley, tens of thousands of Western Turkic cavalry were felled. These ballista soldiers had aimed countless times, and all of them were aimed at the densest concentration of Turkic cavalry. In this volley of ballista bolts, each bolt struck at least 3 Turkic horsemen. In the face of these sharp ballista bolts, even the battle-hardened Turkic horsemen were cut down like weeds. When nearly 20,000 Western Turkic cavalry dropped from their horses in Ney, the battlefield fell deathly still. The eyes of the Western Turkic cavalry were wide open, and even their breathing seemed to stop. Release! While everyone was still reeling in shock from the might of the ballista volley, the aloof young officer immediately launched a second volley. There was a boom as the second volley of ballista bolts began to rain down. Each of the 5,000 ballista bolts was like the scythe of the god of death, reaping the lives of the Western Turkic cavalry. Kill them! The Western Turkic cavalry tried to charge at the ballista army, but before they could get close, they were greeted by a rain of death. The Turkic cavalry seemed like they could not even stand a gust of wind before the mysterious ballista army. Retreat! Retreat! Judafulua anxiously yelled, both shocked and furious. He recognized the ballista army, disguised as a supply convoy. In Dewusley's reply to Ishbara Khagan, he had mentioned that a new ballista army had appeared in the Tang dynasty. They were extremely accurate, fast and powerful. This must be the ballista army from Chishi. The ballista army of the Tang people that Dewusley had mentioned in his letter could not possibly appear here. Although he didn't know why an even larger ballista army had appeared, Judafulua was sure that it had something to do with that temporary protector general of Chishi called Wang Chong. Everyone retreat! Judafulua's thunderous roar resounded over the battlefield. While his voice was still echoing through the air, Judafulua had already dismounted from his horse and flown over the Tang dynasty army like an eagle. Buzz! Stellar energy surged through the air, wrapping around Judafulua like thousands of pythons. In a flash, his stellar energy transformed, exploding with a light even more blinding than the sun. From a distance, Judafulua looked like a giant comet floating in the void, the blinding light completely enveloping him, making it impossible to see his figure. The energy exploding from Judufulua's body swelled by more than 10 times, making everyone feel like a calamity was about to befall them. Comet's descent. This was one of the supreme techniques that had made Judufulua famous throughout the Turkic steppe. By relying on his terrifying strength and unique stellar energy, Judufulua could descend from the sky like a comet and cause a heaven-shaking explosion in the enemy camp. This ballista army of the Tang dynasty, because it was disguised as a supply carriage for the Tang dynasty, was too concentrated. A single strike from a great general like Judufulua would be enough to deal a heavy blow to this army. Ha ha ha, Judufulua. Don't you think it's a little too late to realize that you've fallen for a trap? At this moment, a burst of laughter resounded through the air. Under the black banner of the biting protectorate, and Sishun slapped his warhorse and shot forward like an arrow from a bow. In the blink of an eye, he had struck Judufulua in midair. Even though Judufulua was one of the 3 strongest great generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate, he was still forced to give up on the idea of using Comet's descent to deal a heavy blow to this ballista army. And Sishun, you're so crafty. Judufulua fiercely slashed down with his saber brimming with the fury in his heart. This was not the first time the Sanmi great general had clashed with Sishun, but this clash had truly caught him by surprise. And Sishun had actually used this ultimate move, using himself as bait to sneak up on him. This was not Sishuan's style. With Judufulua caught off guard, the result of this battle was easy to imagine. Ha ha ha, Judufulua, many thanks for the praise. And Sishun heartily laughed. Without the slightest hesitation, and Sishuan's body trembled with stellar energy, and a dazzling sword chi flew through the air, and collided with Judufulua's saber. But this battle was foreordained to be different from what Judufulua and Sishun had imagined. Fire! A furious roar came from the ground as the aloof young general swung down his sword. 70 to 80 ballista bolts immediately shot toward Judufulua from all directions. Damn it! Judufulua's heart exploded with rage at the sight of these ballista bolts. At any other time, Judufulua wouldn't have cared too much about this barrage of ballista bolts. But Sishun was attacking him with all his might. Coupled with the sharp ballista bolts, even Judufulua was forced to retreat. And Sishun, don't get too cocky. One day, I'll make your biting protectorate pay the price. Judufulua used the moment he clashed with Sishun to flee into the distance. Behind him, all the Western Turkic cavalry fled for their lives. Fire! Chapter 1055. Previously, this great Tang army had intentionally concealed itself, waiting for the 2 armies to engage in close combat before suddenly making a move. This small detail immediately became extremely useful. Even though Judufulua had decisively ordered the Western Turkic cavalry to retreat, they had still left tens of thousands of corpses on the battlefield. The more than 100,000 Western Turkic cavalry fled into the distance, and even the Turkic cavalry that had fled far away could hear the screams of the soldiers behind them. This battle had only lasted for a short time, but Judufulua and his Western Turkic cavalry had paid the price of 80,000 lives. On the other hand, the biting protectorate had lost less than 5,000 soldiers. This sort of loss ratio had never been seen before. Enough! All of you come back. This battle should be enough to make Judufulua not dare to act rashly for a year. Within Sishuan's order, all the pursuing soldiers of the biting protectorate retreated. The biting protectorate had far too many infantry and supply wagons, and in terms of agility, they were far inferior to the pure cavalry of the Western Turkic army. Moreover, the ballista army could not follow in the attack. Lord Protector General, our mission is complete, and you have seen the power of the ballista army. Now is the time for you to fulfill your promise. While Sishun was rejoicing and all the biting protectorate soldiers were rejoicing, a cold and untimely voice suddenly rang out. The aloof young ballista officer riding a Turkic horse had appeared at Sishuan's side. Buzz! In an instant, the surroundings became silent, and even the sounds of cheering became much softer. The surrounding biting protectorate soldiers turned to the young officer, and Sishuan's brow creased, his face instantly turning gloomy. Young man, you're quite bold. Do you know that if I wanted to, I could kill you right now? Sishun sternly said, his eyes slowly turning as sharp as swords. If Lord Protector General wants to kill me, I naturally cannot resist, but these are two separate matters. I have fulfilled my promise to Lord Protector General. The Western Turkic army has been defeated, and the Sami Great General Judafulu has retreated. Now is the time for Lord Protector General to fulfill his promise. I trust that someone of Lord Protector General's status will not go back on his word. Yes? The cold-faced young general said with a firm expression. Even in the face of an elite imperial great general like Sishan, his expression remained unperturbed. How dare you? A lowly deputy general dared to be so rude to Protector General. I don't believe that our biting Protectorate army can't deal with a lowly deputy general like you. Next to Sishan, a dark-faced biting Protectorate general finally couldn't help but rebuke him. Lord Protector General, if you want, feel free to kill me. But the deal still had to go through, and the biting Protectorate army had to send reinforcements to Talas. By the way, although I am only a lowly deputy general with insignificant status, the seal of the Chishi Protectorate is stamped on my transaction with Lord Protector General. It represents our Chishi Protector General. I hope that Lord Protector General will carefully consider this matter. The young general with a calm expression did not dodge. He stared at Sishan in front of him, and his eyes showed no signs of backing down. Bastard! How dare you threaten the Lord? Kill him! I don't believe that Chishi Protector General would dare to do anything to our Lord. The surrounding generals of the biting Protectorate were enraged. You dare! If anyone dares to touch our Lord, we'll fight them to the death. At worst, either the fish dies or the net splits. Brothers, prepare to move. In the rear, the soldiers of the Chishi Protectorate were enraged. One of them took off his helmet and threw it to the ground, a savage expression on his face. You dare! Clang clang clang. The surrounding soldiers of the biting Protectorate were also enraged. These soldiers of the Chishi Protectorate did not seem like regular soldiers at all. Their temperament and style made them seem more like bandits and brigands. Enough! All of you, stay your hands! Sishan immediately ordered all the soldiers of the biting Protectorate to put away their weapons. Young man, tell me, what is your name? Sishan turned his head and looked at the cold-faced young general in front of him. He had to admit that even though Sishan had seen countless generals and weathered many storms, this young general's courage and daring was truly impressive. This had left an extremely deep impression on Sishan. Suhanshan. The aloof young general spoke in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing, his eyes determined and fearless. Not bad, I'll remember you. My words just now were just a joke. I will definitely keep my word and immediately lend you the soldiers I promised. And Belu, go and make arrangements for him to select some elites to accompany him back to Chishi. Many thanks, my lord. Suhanshan's expression softened, and with a wave of his hand, the ballista soldiers immediately fell silent. Although these people were bandits and brigands of the Silk Road, all of them used to being unrestrained and undisciplined, all of them treated Suhanshan with the utmost respect. Under Suhanshan's training, these people were no longer bandits and brigands. This was also due to Suhanshan's powerful charisma and talent as a commander. To put it bluntly, if anyone dared to touch Suhanshan now, these people would definitely die for him. Suhanshan quickly left with the entire ballista army and the 10,000 elites of the biting Protectorate. In the biting Protectorate, Suhanshan had left behind 3,000 ballistae. My lord, 10,000 elites is much more than we agreed on with the young Marquis. Is my lord really going to let them leave? Next to Sishan, an extremely intelligent-looking general spoke up. Haha, why wouldn't I agree? I'm just lending them, not actually giving them to the Chishi Protectorate. Moreover, did you really think that I would agree so easily? Long before this, I had already sent a memorial to the imperial court requesting the loan of 10,000 elites. No matter what the outcome of this battle is, our biting Protectorate army is undefeatable. Sishan faintly smiled. But my lord, that fellow called Suhanshan is rather daring. Wang Chong is in the distant Talas, but he actually thought of making a deal with Lord Protector General. And from the soldiers he's trained, it seems like they're completely willing to die for him. This sort of training ability is 1 in 10,000. It would be wonderful if he could be transferred to our biting protectorate. On the side, another general said, and after saying this, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. This general was only speaking from the bottom of his heart. But Sishuan's smile instantly vanished as he gazed in the direction Su Hanshan had left, his gaze extremely profound. Beggar, that's Su Hanshan, keep an eye on him for me. If possible, do everything in your power to recruit him to our biting protectorate. And Sishun suddenly said, his words causing all the generals to tremble and turn to look, including the praising beggar. Everyone knew that this person truly did have some courage to speak so harshly to the Imperial Protector General. But none of them could have imagined that the Protector General actually had such a high opinion of him, that he wanted to recruit him to the biting protectorate. Yes, my lord. Beggar's lips moved as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, he lowered his head and respectfully replied. The other generals also obediently lowered their heads. Just like the ballista soldiers trained by bandits and highwaymen, all the soldiers of the biting protectorate were absolutely subservient to Sishun. Courage, strategy, initiative, leadership, fearlessness. This sort of independent demeanor is not the talent of a general, but the talent of a great general. And Sishuan's eyes were cold, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. When an imperial great general encountered another imperial great general, they would always feel the same way. And Sishun saw this sort of thing in this young commander called Su Hanshan, because that was his younger self. When he thought about how the youngest son of the Wang clan at Talas had so many talented subordinates of great potential under his command, and Sishun couldn't help but feel a tinge of envy. The entire 9 provinces was once more thrown into turmoil by the Battle of Talas. The distant Qixi Protectorate was like the eye of a storm, drawing countless elite soldiers to its location. As the only way to Qixi, Wuxiang's City of Steel became the best witness to all this. Look, on the high walls of the City of Steel, a young child suddenly pointed into the distance and excitedly shouted. These words immediately attracted everyone's attention. All the children and craftsmen on the walls of the City of Steel, as well as the disciples of the great clans, merchants, and pedestrians turned to look. Rumble! In the direction the child was pointing, a group of 7,000 soldiers, clad in shining armor and exuding a majestic aura, were silently galloping away from Wuxiang's City of Steel toward the Qixi Protectorate headquarters in the rear. In the center of this group of black-armored cavalry was a war banner emblazoned with the image of the Big Dipper Army. It's the Big Dipper Army. It's Great General Geshu Han's Big Dipper Army. Someone in the crowd cried out. Look, it's the Divine Martial Army. At the very front of the army was a group of black-armored cavalry that was particularly eye-catching. Compared to the other Big Dipper Army soldiers, this group of black-armored cavalry had a deep and solemn aura, and they were at least 3 times stronger. Although there were only 3,000 of them, their movements were unified, and their orders were strictly obeyed. Their aura was even greater than that of 30,000 soldiers. The air within 3 feet of them was so blurry that nothing could be seen clearly. I didn't think that the Big Dipper Great General would send the Divine Martial Army. Chapter 1056. The Divine Martial Army. This was the most elite force of the Big Dipper Army. It was said that the Tang Dynasty's war god and crown prince's grand protector, Wang Zhongxi and Geshu Han, these elite soldiers had been specially selected from the Big Dipper Army. Even after so many years, the Big Dipper Army only had a few thousand people, and they were often understaffed. This was an extremely powerful army. Even though they were clearly outnumbered, they had managed to defeat the White Lion cavalry of Yusang Great General Witadra Konglo, and they had also managed to turn the tide in an extremely disadvantageous situation. Even when facing an enemy 5 times their number, they had managed to pierce through the enemy camp and utterly crush an army of 50 to 60,000. This was the true backbone of the Big Dipper Army, and the 2 words Divine Martial had been bestowed upon them by the Holy Emperor. The 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army and the 4,000 elites of the Big Dipper Army silently flew past the solemn City of Steel. Not long after the Divine Martial Army left, in the darkness of the night, Another army came from the distance. Rumble. The earth quaked and dust roiled. Countless people surged out of the city of steel and looked toward the source of the sound. What's going on here? Why is there a mountain there? Outside the city of steel, a group of people looked to the southeast in shock. At some point, a majestic and towering mountain had appeared in what had been an empty space in the distance. Most unbelievable of all was that this massive mountain that seemed to connect the heavens and the earth was trembling as it approached the city of steel. For a moment, the area in front of the city of steel was deathly still. Everyone stared at the huge mountain that was constantly moving towards them. They were all silent and dumbfounded. However, everything was far from over. In the next second, everyone heard the sound of waves. At first it was barely audible, and only a few people heard it. However, in a short period of time, the sound grew louder and louder. In the end, the sound was earth-shattering and could be heard thousands of miles away. "Look!" Someone in the crowd cried out in alarm. Under the night sky, everyone could clearly see that the huge mountain range in the distance had disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a huge wave that reached the sky. Endless waves surged through the world, and the waves at the very front were several dozen times taller than the city of steel. A 6 or 7-year-old child immediately burst into tears when he saw this scene. The merchants and travelers who were watching also had expressions of fear on their faces. In the face of the overwhelming and earth-shattering waves, they couldn't help but subconsciously retreat. Retreat! Retreat quickly! Amidst the cries of alarm, many people were so scared that their faces turned pale, and they quickly retreated into the city. However, before they could retreat into the city, the monstrous sound of waves disappeared again. At the bottom of the disappearing waves, an army of 8,000 black-armored soldiers galloped over from afar with a solemn and dignified aura. Above this army, a flag with a 5-clawed golden dragon fluttered in the night. Imperial Army. A peddler who had spent some time in the capital was dumbfounded by the fluttering banner in the darkness. Those who had spent a long time in the capital were no stranger to the symbol of the Imperial Army, but he was sure that he had never seen this black-armored army in the capital. Rumble. The earth quaked, and the entire city of steel trembled. The 8,000-strong Tang Dynasty Imperial Army passed through the city of steel, as if they hadn't seen anything. Their eyes focused as they continued to gallop toward Qixi. Night fell, and after the clamor, everyone fell asleep. But at this moment, the third wave of Tang Dynasty reinforcements arrived. Woof woof. Chirp chirp. Without any warning, all the animals and birds in the city of steel began to uneasily cry out. The birds anxiously hopped about in their cages, while the dogs looked to the southeast and barked, as if they had sensed something extremely dangerous. Under the management of the various great clans, the city of steel was no longer what it had been in the past. Many commoners and peddlers had gathered here, and the city was gradually beginning to prosper. But a situation like this had never occurred before. A peddler who had been startled out of his sleep pushed open his window. Just when he was about to curse, he saw the sky outside and froze in place. The originally dim starlight and dark night sky suddenly emitted a blazing white light. If one looked closely, they would discover that it was a shocking sword chi that shot out from the southeast. It was like the Milky Way hanging upside down, piercing through the entire void, and fiercely stabbing into the night sky. Under the illumination of this majestic sword chi, all the stars dimmed, and even the night sky glowed with light. The peddler placed his hands on the window and stared at that majestic sword chi that stretched for several hundred li, his entire body frozen in place. At this moment, the peddler suddenly heard the rumbling of the earth. It was not obvious at first, but it grew more and more intense, until even the earth itself began to tremble. In the void, the originally inconspicuous sharp and austere aura also increased rapidly in that instant. In just a short period of time, it had become so dense that it was unbelievable. Whoosh! The silent and slumbering city of steel suddenly exploded with activity. Everyone had been roused from their stupor by this astonishing energy. Suddenly, a bone-chilling chill filled the air, and the peddler in front of the window sensed that under the influence of this somber chi, the temperature in the city of steel had plummeted. Bang! The peddler slammed his hands together, closed the window, and then retreated back into the city in fear. The people in the city of steel also sensed something at this moment, and the clamor instantly turned into a deathly stillness. Rumble, the footsteps got closer and closer. At this moment, only the guards on the walls of the city of steel could see into the distance. An army of more than 4,000 soldiers, shrouded in white sword chi, swept past the city of steel. These 4,000 soldiers were solemn and silent, and this silent pressure made all the guards on the walls tremble in fear. Divine prison. In the light of the white sword chi, the guards on the walls could clearly see the words on the white banners of this army. Around 15 minutes later, this army had completely left the city of steel, vanishing in the direction of Chishi. On the walls, all the guards were still immersed in that shocking aura, unable to come back to their senses for a long time. In a single day, 3 armies had appeared, each of them incredibly powerful and far beyond the imagination of mortals. This was an unprecedented shock to the people of the city of steel. Impossible. Just where did Marquis find such a powerful army? On the high walls, a former soldier of the Chishi Protectorate muttered to himself, unable to speak for a long time. One powerful army after another passed by the city of steel, surging toward the Protectorate in the rear. For the people of the city of steel, this was the first time they had ever seen so many powerful armies, and the first time they had learned that the Tang dynasty had so many secret armies. The events that had taken place in the last few days would be the topic of conversation for the rest of their lives. In just a few days, the Chishi Protectorate had become the largest military stronghold in the northwest, second only to Talas. The Divine Martial Army, the Xuanwu Army, the Divine Prison Army, Zhang Shougui's Celestial Capital Army. All these armies were in strict formation, their ranks clearly delineated as they stood in front of the Chishi Protectorate. All of them were silent, and the atmosphere was somber and imposing. All that's left is Su Han's Han, Cui Piaoqi indifferently said, standing next to Wang Bei. In the plaza, the 6,000 Wuxian cavalry in the very center were the most conspicuous figures. Although they did not have enough Wuxia steel swords, the Wuxian cavalry had used meteoric metal as replacements. Together with their meteoric metal armor, their top-class equipment was enough to make the majority of armies pale in comparison. It's about time. I've already received word from Su Han's Han that he has successfully completed his mission and is leading his army in this direction. Wang Bei said, turning his head to the east just like Cui Piaoqi. As if responding to the thoughts of the two, about an hour later, the wind whistled in the distance and grass fragments filled the sky. A huge army covered the sky and covered the earth. Like a surging black tide, it swept towards this place. It's the army of the Biting Protectorate. A sharp-eyed Wuxian horseman immediately noticed the black dragon banner fluttering above the army. Chishi and Biting were neighbors, so all of them were extremely familiar with the war banner of the Biting Protectorate. The appearance of the Biting Protectorate army meant that Su Han's Han had successfully completed his mission. Has all the army gathered? A few moments later, Su Han's Han emerged from the rear and appeared in front of Wang Bei and Cui Piaoqi. There's still a division of the ultimate martial army on the way. They'll arrive in around 2 days, Wang Bei said. With Wang Chang's departure, the 3 titans of Chishi were Wang Bei, Cui Piaoqi and Su Han's Han. As Wang Chang's second brother and the absolute leader, Wang Bei was responsible for the majority of communications. The Wang clan was a clan of ministers and generals, and it had a long history of learning. Wang Bei handled these matters with ease and familiarity. Speed is of the essence in war, and war can break out at any moment. We've already gathered nearly 60,000 soldiers here, and it's about time we set off for Talas to reinforce Lord Protector General. As for the 4,000 soldiers of the ultimate martial army, have them come from the rear. They should be able to meet up at Talas, Su Han's Han sternly said, his expression cold and aloof. Wang Bei and Cui Piaoqi both nodded. On this point, the two of them shared the same view as Su Han's Han. Since that's the case, let's inform the 2 venerable seniors to prepare to move out, Su Han's Han said. An hour later, more than 50,000 elite soldiers of the Great Tang, set out from Chishi toward Talas amid the rumbling of the golden drums and a cloud of dust in front of the Chishi Protectorate headquarters. Chapter 1057. Meanwhile, in the distant black forest to the west of Talas, countless birds suddenly cried out in alarm as they soared into the sky. Behind these birds was an enormous Arab army marching toward the black forest. Even before the army arrived, 3 dazzling war banners were already visible. They were a black crescent moon, a flowing river, and a blazing black hellfire. Bong bong bong. The war drums thundered, causing the entire black forest to tremble before the might of this enormous army. They're here. At the very front of the black forest, Ziad suddenly stood up and looked behind him, a look of delight in his eyes. Behind Ziad, Abu Muslim had also stood up and was motionless as he looked behind him. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed everything. The Arabs desperately needed a victory in this war. Abu Muslim and Ziad had been waiting for this day for far too long. Breaking Talas and conquering the entire Eastern world had always been Abu Muslim and all the other Arab governors' most fervent desires. As the strongest governors of iron and blood of the Arab East, neither Abu Muslim nor Ziad could tolerate losing to an infidel army in a tiny place like Talas. Ha ha ha, Abu Muslim, we meet again. Vigorous laughter came from the Black Forest as Governor Osman of Cairo rode out from the army on a large horse, charging toward Abu Muslim and Ziad. Lord Osman, we've been waiting for you for a long time. Ziad heartily laughed as he rode forward to welcome him, an extremely amiable expression on his face. Ziad had also participated in the war against the Sassanid dynasty, and he had even worked together with Osman to kill a Sassanid great general. Now that they were meeting, they could be considered old friends. Welcome. On the other side, Abu Muslim rode forward, his expression calm as he spoke 2 simple words. Abu Muslim, you're still the same, that scowl on your face that hasn't changed in the slightest. What, are the Tang people of Talas really that formidable? Even you aren't a match for them? Osman said with a smile. His eyes were filled with curiosity. Abu Muslim was a symbol of invincibility in the Arabian Empire, and in the last few decades, there had never been a country that he could not conquer. But this time, he had not only failed to conquer, but suffered a defeat. Upon hearing this, Osman had to admit that he was quite surprised, even thinking that this was a farce and a joke. Osman, don't get careless. This army of the Tang people is different from any opponent we've encountered before. Their weapons, equipment, strategies, and commanders are all extremely powerful. Moreover, the martial arts of the East are completely different from ours. Mazel died precisely because he was too careless. Abu Muslim sternly said. Really? A faint voice rang out, revealing a hint of disdain and dominance. All the more reason for me to give it a try. I'd like to see if there is any army in this world that our Mamelukes can't conquer. Ibak, mounted on a large white horse, slowly approached from the rear. My lord. Ziad's heart trembled at the sight of Ibak, and he immediately bowed. The Mamelukes were an extremely powerful army that all of Arabia knew of, and Ibak, as the leader of the Mamelukes, possessed an extremely influential status in Arabia. Even Ziad had to treat him with some respect. Ibak, since that's the case, you can try my army. At this moment, an icy voice came from the rear, accompanied by the galloping of hooves. A dazzling golden figure mounted on an abnormally large Arabian steed slowly rode up from the rear. Translated by Hypersheep 325 Kataba. Osman, Abu Muslim, Ziad, and Ibak all shivered at the sight of this figure and immediately shut their mouths. In the entire Arabian Empire, Governor of War Kataba commanded an army that was undoubtedly the most unique. Kataba was a warmonger, starting wars even more frequently than Abu Muslim. He was an out-and-out war madman. In the Arabian Empire, Kataba was one of the few existences whose status surpassed Abu Muslim's. His strength and military authority were so great that even the caliph had to think of ways to restrain him. This madman. A hint of anger flashed through Ibak's eyes, but he did not dare to say anything. The Mamelukes only had 10,000 soldiers at full strength, but the elite soldiers under Kataba's command were several dozen times that number. The Mamelukes were meant to break defenses, not engage in large-scale battles like this. Even if the Mamelukes could break through Qutaybah's army, they would inevitably end up in a bitter battle that would result in grievous losses. Most importantly, Ibak was no match for Qutaybah. In Arabia, Qutaybah was known as the war god, so one could easily imagine just how powerful he was. Unless absolutely necessary, Ibak did not want to clash with this war madman. Abu Muslim, you've truly disappointed me. I didn't think that someone of your strength, and the assistance of the Behemoth army and Skyquaking army, would lose to a puny Eastern army of only a few dozen thousand. I once believed that you would be able to replace me in the future, but it now seems that I overestimated you. Qutaybah's entire body was shrouded in golden light as he ignored Ibak and turned to Abu Muslim. Abu Muslim's brow creased as if he wanted to say something, but he decided against it. The Arabian Empire was a strictly hierarchical society, and strength spoke for everything. Abu Muslim had just suffered a crushing defeat at Talas, so he naturally had nothing to say to the mighty Qutaybah. Qutaybah, you will soon find out whether the Tang people are strong or weak. Since the army has arrived, it is time to break into Talas and exterminate the Tang dynasty army. Ziyad informed the Uzun and Western Turks to immediately move out. Abu Muslim turned his head and said, "Yes, my lord." Ziyad came back to his senses and urged his horse away. Flap flap. An Arabian hunting falcon took off from the Black Forest, past Talas, and into the Uzun camp. At this moment, the Uzun camp was heavily guarded, and the atmosphere was completely different from before. More than 40,000 Uzun reinforcements from the various great clans and royal districts had finally arrived at their destination and met up with Dalawan Ruozin's forces. Dalawan Ruozin now had nearly 80,000 soldiers, and they were much stronger than before. Haha, everyone's finally here. A smile appeared on Dalawan Ruozin's lips as he held Ziyad's letter. After waiting for so long, the moment had finally arrived. 3 governors, 400,000 soldiers, and the strength of the Uzun and Western Turks. In this battle, no matter what, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji had no chance of surviving. Pass on my order. The army is ready to move out. Dalawan Ruozin lightly flicked the letter. Reporting. At this moment, the flap to the tent was thrown open, and a Tibetan messenger rushed in. He got down on one knee and said, "Sir, you have a report." Prime Minister, the scouts in the rear have reported that a large number of Tang dynasty reinforcements are moving toward Talas. Based on their numbers, there are at least 60,000, and all of them are elites. Prime Minister, please give your instructions. Buzz. The tent fell deathly still, time seeming to stop. Everyone's movements seemed to freeze, and even Dalawan Ruozin's expression froze, the smile on his lips instantly vanishing. How far are they from us? Dalawan Ruozin asked, his brows deeply creasing. He had never expected this news. They're moving very quickly. They should be able to reach us in a day at most, the messenger respectfully said. The messenger respectfully replied. The tent instantly fell silent. Dalawan Ruozin rested his chin on his hand and said nothing. The Tang dynasty's reinforcements have come very quickly. It seems like that holy emperor of the Tang dynasty has also sensed the danger in the northwest and sent his army ahead of time. Dusong Mangpoj sternly said. This was the most surprising piece of news. Everyone had been preparing to move out, but the Tang dynasty's reinforcements had arrived. That's not what I'm worried about. Huashu Wuzong also spoke, his brow deeply furrowed. The Tang dynasty is different from us. They have too many enemies and can't muster many soldiers. 60,000 elites is truly beyond my expectations. If we continue to advance and attack Talas with the Arabs, I'm worried that it won't be the Tang people of Talas who will be attacked from the front and rear, but us. In the art of war, the greatest taboo was to be attacked from the front and rear. The Arabs had an astonishing ability to recover from battle. Although they had lost several 100,000 soldiers in a single battle, they had quickly gathered another 400,000 soldiers. Even if they were attacked from the front and rear, they had no fear. But Uzun only had 80,000 soldiers. If they were attacked from the front and rear, they might be completely wiped out. The tent was quiet. This change had come too quickly. The joy of the arrival of the Arab reinforcements had not lasted for long before Uzin's men had to consider their own situation. In a flash, the mood in the tent became extremely grave. In the tent, Dalwin Ruozin smiled and quickly came to a decision. It seems like we'll have to change our strategy. Let's go deal with the Tang dynasty's reinforcements, and buy some time for Abu Muslim and the others. In addition, inform Wuxia that it's been so long. It's about time for us to meet up. A few moments after Dalwin Ruozin's order, an eagle soared into the sky and flew toward the Western Turkic camp. Less than 2 hours later, the Tibetan and Turkic armies had merged back into one and were rapidly advancing in the opposite direction of Talas. Chapter 1058. Time slowly passed, and as the Arabs, Tibetans, and Western Turks began to move, several eagles began to descend from the sky. At the same time, scouts began to rush into Talas, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Reporting. It's bad. We've discovered the tracks of the Arabs. A group of Arab cavalry is approaching Talas at full speed. Based on their numbers, there are at least 400,000 of them. The scouts rushed into the hall one after the other, but their reports were identical. Boom! A single stone gave rise to 1,000 ripples. Everyone in the hall was shocked when they heard the contents of the scouts' report. Many people even stood up in unison. Although the Khorasani had long ago mentioned that 400,000 Arab soldiers were on their way, they were still stunned to hear it confirmed. After more than a month, this day has finally arrived. Gao Xianji took in a deep breath and slowly stood up from the conference table, his eyes fixed on Wang Chong. Wang Chong nodded, his face emotionless, but a complicated thought flickered through his mind. What had to come had finally come. After waiting for so long, the Tang dynasty and the Arabs were finally going to have to fight. But unlike the previous battles, this would be a decisive battle. At Talas, only one of the Arabs or the Tang dynasty could survive, and only one side's banner could be planted on the high walls of Talas. Shui Qianjun, has there been any news from the imperial court? My lord, Su Han's Han, General Wang, and General Cui have already led 60,000 reinforcements out of Qixi and are heading to Talas at full speed. Wang Chong nodded and continued. Have the defenses of Qixi and the City of Steel been prepared? My lord, the Xiang armies of Longxi, the Guanyi Circuit, and the Eastern Circuit have already been stationed there. Although they aren't strong enough to attack, they should be able to defend without too much of a problem. Shui Qianjun bowed. Very good. Wang Chong nodded slightly, without the slightest fluctuation in his eyes. Now that all the reinforcements have arrived, this battle is inevitable. Now, only Dalwin Ruozin and Wuxia stand between us and the reinforcements. As Wang Chong spoke, he took 2 small flags from the side and inserted them into the sand table where the Uzin camp and the Western Turkic camp were located. Wang Chong, Dalwin Ruozin is very difficult to deal with. He probably already knows that the reinforcements from Qixi have set off. What do we do? Do we need to reinforce them? When it came to Dalwin Ruozin, Cheng Qianli never dared to let his guard down. In more than a month, the Tang dynasty had thought of ambushing them several times, but Dalwin Ruozin and Wuxia had always been on guard and had made preparations. By now, the two armies had become extremely vigilant against the Tang dynasty. The slightest movement from them would be discovered ahead of time. Even though Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli had sent out scouts to clear out the spies in the city, they killed wave after wave of spies, as if there was no end to them. In the end, they had no choice but to give up on this idea. At the very least, until they had the absolute advantage, now was not the time to fight with the Uzin and the Western Turks. There's no need. To their surprise, Wang Chong straightforwardly waved his hand. Dalwin Ruozin won't fight with us. As soon as he notices that we're moving, he'll immediately flee. But if Dalwin Ruozin really wants to do something, he's probably looking for the wrong target, Wang Chong said. Shui Qianjun, immediately notify Su Han's Han. Tell him that Dalwin Ruozin has arrived. Now is the time for him to perform. Wang Chong sternly said. Everyone in the hall glanced at each other. And even Gao Xianji couldn't help but frown. Suhanshan. They had never heard of this name before. But from the expression on Wang Chong's face, they could tell that he deeply trusted this person. Wang Chong, this is. Gao Xianji turned his head, an inquisitive look on his face. A person who will make Dalawan Ruozen suffer. Wang Chong faintly smiled. Time slowly passed, and the security of the city of Talas grew tighter and tighter. The training of the Mo Saber unit and the Wuxian cavalry grew more intense. Clang clang clang. Sparks flew and smoke roiled through Talas as Mo Saber after Mo Saber was forged and delivered to the hands of the Mo Saber unit. Sets of armor forged from meteoric metal were also delivered. Several days later, with a heavy hammer strike, the last Mo Saber on the metal platform slowly dissipated from the flames and smoke. The equipment of the Mo Saber unit was now complete. It's done. Send all this equipment to the second training ground. A hand reached out from the side and grabbed the Mo Saber. After carefully inspecting it, Cheng Qianli gave a satisfied nod. Yes. The Anxi Protectorate Army commander gave the order, and a group of Anxi Protectorate Army soldiers stepped forward to deliver the weapons and equipment to the second training ground. Everyone keep your spirits up. The scouts are on high alert. If the Arabs move, report to me immediately. Eagle team be on guard for the entire day. If the Arab army approaches during the night, I'll hold you accountable. In the howling winds, the atmosphere in front of the first defense line was tense to the extreme. Teams of shieldmen, cavalry, and axemen were spread out in front of the defense line, all of them on guard. The Arabs were about to arrive, and no one dared to slack off. While Talas was strengthening its defenses, several hundred kilometers from Chishi, the Izan Western Turks and the Tang dynasty reinforcements were engaged in a brief but intense battle. This battle had not escalated to the level of a protracted battle, but it had left many corpses on the battlefield. Prime Minister, what do we do now? Next to Dalawan Ruozen, Huoba Senji turned his head to look behind him, a complicated expression on his face. Losing to Wang Chong and Gao Xianji was one thing, but now even an unknown brat from the Tang dynasty had viciously tricked them. All was quiet, and as Dalawan Ruozen glanced at the countless heavily wounded soldiers on horseback, his heart sank. I was careless. I didn't think that the Tang dynasty reinforcements would be so powerful. Now is not the time to bother with them. Pass on my order. Retreat according to the original plan. We must meet up with the Arabs as quickly as possible. In addition, tell Abu Muslim that the Tang dynasty reinforcements are not simple. Tell him to be careful. Dalawan Ruozen sternly said. Yes, Prime Minister. A messenger flew off. Prime Minister, do you need me to move out against that brat? If you do, there's still time. Huoshi Wuzong suddenly said. If we don't deal with him now, I'm worried that the Tang dynasty will produce another character like Wang Chong. In this battle, Dalawan Ruozen had been in control the entire time, so there had not been many casualties. What had killed the most Uzan soldiers were the 5,000 ballistae hidden in the rear. Prime Minister, I agree with Huoshu on this point. If necessary, I can also move out. Dusong Mangpoj also said. Dalawan Ruozen was publicly acknowledged as the most intelligent minister in the Uzan, and the only one who could surpass him was Dalan Trinling. For an unknown 20-something-year-old youth to be able to scheme against a wise minister like Dalawan Ruozen was partly because he had underestimated his foe. But even so, it was enough to make one want to kill him. There's no need. Dalawan Ruozen hesitated for a few moments and then shook his head. This wave of reinforcements from the Tang dynasty is not as simple as all of you imagine. As for that brat, he definitely has a backup plan. If we fight with them now, we won't have much of an advantage. Let's not worry about them for now. Once we reach Talas, we'll unite with the Arabs and wipe them out. No matter what, they won't be able to escape. In addition, we've already achieved our goal. Those pits, holes, and ditches should be enough to stop them for a day or two. Dalawan Ruozen and Huoshu Wuzong hesitated for a few moments before finally nodding. Gallop! Dalawan Ruozen and Huoshu Wuzong led the Uzan army in another direction, the Western Turks following closely behind. Time slowly passed, the atmosphere growing tenser and tenser. The movements of the Arabs were constantly being reported to Talas. At this moment, several dozen li to the west of Talas, there was a sparse forest lush with vegetation. An Anchi Protectorate army scout was hiding behind a knotted tree, using dry grass and leaves to disguise himself. Arnhead, do you see anything? The scout, who was disguised as a tree branch and hiding beside the tree, said. The surroundings were quiet, and after a long time, a voice came from above. Nothing. 6 groups of soldiers have already left. The Arabs won't be able to get here that quickly. What we need to do now is wait for news. Once we receive word from the front, we can send it to the rear as quickly as possible. Everything seemed normal, and it seemed like there was no one else besides the scout. But if one looked carefully, one would discover that on the treetop above this scout was another Tang Dynasty scout, his body curled up and cleverly concealed, constantly looking around, especially high up in the sky. Following the scout's gaze, one could see a rock eagle in the sky, its wings spread open as it circled in the air. Eagles could see things much farther than ordinary people. These rock eagles in the sky would use different flight paths to tell the scouts different information. But so far, everything was normal. Cree! Suddenly a shrill shriek rang out. The rock eagle circling in the sky suddenly let out a mournful cry. Before the 2 scouts could react, the rock eagle's body trembled, and it immediately plummeted to the ground like a kite with its string cut. After a long while, they heard the sound of something heavy crashing to the ground. Chapter 1059. Tai Tu, could it be? The scout under the tree raised his head, his expression bewildered. Impossible, it can't be. The Arabs won't arrive that quickly. And if they did, we would have already received the signal. After all, there are 6 groups in front of us, all of them extremely experienced. There's no way they could have made a mistake. On the tree, Tai Tu shook his head, immediately denying the scouts' conjecture. The scouts of the Tang Dynasty had a strict system that made it impossible for any mistakes to occur. It wasn't impossible to defeat this system, but one needed terrifying strength. The 2 of them stared at each other in silence. No, I'll go down and take a look. Some of the rock eagles were injured in battle. It's hard to say if they didn't die from their injuries. After a few moments of silence, Tai Tu slid down from the tree, called his horse, and galloped off into the distance. However, not long after they left, without the slightest warning, the earth trembled and the heavens shook. The entire world suddenly shook violently. What's going on here? In the distance, Tai Tu abruptly stopped, and the second scout behind him also had an astonished expression. Not even an enemy army could have moved so quickly from the rock eagle's descent to the quaking. But an even more astonishing change was yet to come. In the blink of an eye, the quaking reached its limit. The entire world began to shudder, and even the warhorses beneath them seemed to sense something and uneasily widened their eyes. The quaking grew louder and louder, and in the blink of an eye, it drowned out all other sounds. Even the sound of one's own breathing had disappeared. Cloud Leopard, let's go. Hurry. At that moment, Tai Tu seemed to sense something. He abruptly turned his head and anxiously shouted behind him. But Cloud Leopard couldn't hear anything. He could only judge what the scout was saying from the shape of his lips. Plush. The moment he turned his head, an arrow pierced through his body, and Tai Tu's voice came to an abrupt halt. He lowered his head and stared in disbelief at his chest, only to see a blood-stained wound where the sharp tip of an arrow had pierced through his heart. Tai Tu's lips parted, his eyes went round, and then he dropped from his horse. Tai Tu. Cloud Leopard was so shocked that he almost stopped breathing. Too fast. It was too fast. This scene was completely out of his expectations, and he couldn't even do anything. And at this moment, Cloud Leopard saw an unforgettable scene. Rumble. On the horizon ahead, countless trees fell one after another with cracking sounds. Behind these trees, a dense and majestic black torrent of steel filled every corner of one's field of vision like black destructive flames. Moreover, with astonishing speed, it covered the heavens and the earth as it rushed over. Violent winds whistled and emitted waves of ghostly wails and wolf howls. At that instant, The entire world seemed to be overshadowed by the imposing aura of this army that could topple mountains and overturn the seas. In just a short while, the army that was as vast as the sea came closer. It wasn't that Cloud Leopard had never seen a powerful army before. And the Anshi Protectorate army itself was an extremely powerful army. But for the first time, Cloud Leopard felt his scalp go numb at the sight of this hellish army. There were too many of them. In his entire life, he had never seen so many elite soldiers. All of them had a fierce aura, and each of them had been tempered by the cruelest blood and fire. They were true veterans of 100 battles. At the same time, this army was moving far too fast. From the time he had felt the tremors to the time he noticed them, not even a few seconds had passed. This momentum was unstoppable, like a wildfire burning through the plains, unstoppable. How could there be so many powerful soldiers in an army? Cloud Leopard's heart trembled in fear. He suddenly understood the fate of the 6 scout teams. And he also understood why the Rock Eagles had dropped without sending a message. This was no ordinary army. They were unprecedentedly powerful. And this army was advancing day and night at a terrifying speed, rapidly approaching the city of Talas. If not for this, they would have never reached this place so early. I have to report this to Lord Protector General and the young Marquis as quickly as possible. Cloud Leopard felt a chill in his heart. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, this thought flashed through his mind. Without thinking, he immediately mounted his horse and stabbed the horses, but with the tip of his saber. Gallop! Gallop! One man and one horse immediately turned around and quickly rushed into the distance. Behind him, the 400,000 Arab soldiers surged like a black tide toward Talas with astonishing speed. Reporting. An hour later, as the countless Tang dynasty soldiers in front of Talas were on guard, an urgent voice came from the distance. In a cloud of dust, an Anshi Protectorate army scout rode at full speed toward the city of Talas. The Arabs are here. The Arabs are here. 400,000 soldiers are marching day and night, and they're only 30-some li from Talas. The scout's anxious voice resounded over Talas. Rumble! Like a boulder crashing to the ground, the calm defense line was instantly thrown into turmoil. The city of Talas was like an enormous war machine, and with this shout, it began to rapidly move. Rumble! The gates opened, and in a flash of cold light, countless soldiers surged out of the city to stand in front of the first defense line. The winds howled, and the clouds of war filled the air. Countless soldiers had appeared on the walls of Talas, and the air was suddenly filled with tension. Who? And almost at the same time, there was a flash of light, and the sound of hooves could be heard as a figure charged out of the city. My lord, it's urgent. The Arabs have killed our scouts, and are approaching at full speed. Cloud Leopard was agitated at the sight of the young, but imposing figure on the back of the horse, and he hurriedly galloped forward. But before he could reach, his body suddenly went limp, and his vision blurred as he dropped from his horse. But the expected fall from his horse did not occur. Just when Cloud Leopard was about to hit the ground, a young, slender, but powerful arm caught his body. My lord! Cloud Leopard rejoiced at the sight of that familiar young face. His spirits instantly roused. Be careful of the Arabs. They're coming. I know. Be at ease. We've already made our preparations. Wang Chong solemnly said to the Anshi Protectorate army soldier in a mellow voice. Wonderful. Cloud Leopard originally had many things he wanted to say, but upon hearing Wang Chong's words, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief, his mind much more relaxed. Only now did Cloud Leopard feel an extreme exhaustion. His eyes slowly grew unfocused, and his body began to collapse. Behind the first defense line, Wang Chong slowly lowered the body of the Anshi Protectorate army soldier. As he gazed at the sharp and blood-stained Arab arrow protruding from the soldier's chest, his expression became extremely sharp. The wound on the scout's chest had been fatal. The enemy's arrow had been imbued with destructive energy, not only shattering his heart, but also jolting his meridians. He had only been able to last until now through his firm will. Probably not even the Arabs had expected this. Don't worry. Those who offend the Tang dynasty will be executed no matter how far away they are. All the Arabs will eventually pay the price. Wang Chong quietly said to himself as he stood up. His gaze swept past the steel walls as he gazed into the distance. The wind howled, and though he couldn't see anything, Wang Chong could sense a somber aura in the wind. Wang Chong, a voice rang out. Gao Xianji walked out from inside. He looked to the east with a solemn expression. Behind him, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, the other Anqi generals, and the king of Gonka had also rushed over upon hearing the news. Tinsum Li, Wang Chong said. The enemy is advancing very quickly, and they seem to be on guard against our scouts. Other than this scout, none of the other scouts have sent back any information. The vanguard is probably extremely formidable. Based on the time, we should be able to see them very soon. The scout had sent back a message that they were still 30-some li away, but this number was based on the distance from which the scout had discovered the enemy. Based on the time that had passed, Wang Chong determined that the Arab army was probably very close to Talis. In the distance there was nothing at all. It was completely silent. However, regardless of whether it was Gao Xianji, Wang Yan, Cheng Qianli, or the others, they all sensed a strange somber feeling in the air. Their hearts sank. Cree. A few moments later, in front of the first defense line, in the sky 10-some li away, 7 or 8 rock eagles patrolling the perimeter suddenly let out mournful cries and plummeted to the ground. Everyone was stunned by this sight, and Wang Chong's expression darkened, turning extremely grave. Many people had no idea what had happened, but Wang Chong had seen it all. Just now 7 or 8 arrows had been fired at them. Although these rock eagles were extremely agile and well-trained, they had been unable to dodge them. The rock eagles patrolling in the sky have a range of 10-some li. If the enemy was able to wipe out all the rock eagles without giving them any warning, they must have a range of 10-some li, and they must be extremely strong. Wang Chong's expression was solemn, his mind in turmoil. Although he still hadn't seen the Arab army, the ferocious momentum, sharp attacks, and frightening speed were enough to make everyone feel an enormous threat. Chapter 1060. Nay. The rumbling grew louder and louder, and a few moments later, everyone could hear the fierce neighing of horses. The earth quaked as countless soldiers began to charge toward Talis. Ready! Suddenly, a high-pitched voice rang out in front of the first line of defense. In an instant, the armor vibrated, the steel clanged, and the weapons flashed under the gloomy sky. The countless soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate Army and Qixi Protectorate Army, as well as the mercenaries from the western regions, instantly became as firm as a steel wall, but also like a bow that had been pulled to its limit. The atmosphere instantly became somber and somber. The rumbling of the earth and the neighing of war horses grew louder and louder. After some time, the air in front of them began to churn as a faint black line, as thin as a hair, suddenly appeared on the horizon. At the start, this black line was very faint, but in the blink of an eye, it had transformed into a massive black wave that began to fiercely shudder. The Arabs. The atmosphere instantly became tense. At this time, there was no need to remind them. Everyone knew what they were facing. This was not their first time clashing with the Arabs, but this wave of Arabs gave off a completely different feeling. A defense line of more than 60 li, with so many scouts and rock eagles, had been completely devoid of any news except for one scout, who had managed to escape through sheer willpower. Such a thing had never happened before. Each of the scouts of the Tang dynasty had been tempered through blood and fire. In their battles with the Uzan and the Western Turks, they had completely crushed their opponents, and all of them were extremely experienced. To be able to kill so many elite scouts and prevent them from sending back any news meant one thing. This time it was definitely a formidable foe. Is this the strength of the Arabs? Wang Chong solemnly muttered to himself as he gazed into the distance. Although he had long ago learned from the Khorasani that this army was coming, knowing was one thing and seeing was another. This group of soldiers gave him a completely different feeling from Abu Muslims. They were even more valiant and capable. This was a true army that had been tempered 100 times. Qutayba. Although he still hadn't seen the commander, Wang Chong already understood what sort of army he was facing. Wind, forest, fire, and mountain. These were the 4 words of the art of war. The Arabs did not have such a saying, but this army was undoubtedly a perfect fit for these 4 words. They were as swift as the wind, as gentle as a forest, as aggressive as fire, and as immovable as a mountain. At this moment, even Wang Chong was somewhat shaken, but it was only for a moment before Wang Chong's eyes hardened. With 60,000 against 400,000, they were undoubtedly at an extreme disadvantage, but Wang Chong could not retreat, and the Great Tang could not retreat. This battle could only be fought to the bitter end. Everyone hear my order. A moment later, Wang Chong's eyes turned sharp. Shield men quickly enter the walls. Axemen prepare to ambush and await orders. Craftsmen prepare to repair and reinforce the walls. Ballistae scale 45. Aim at the center of the enemy formation and fire. 5th unit, 6th unit, and 7th unit. Await orders and prepare to reinforce at any moment. Wuxian Cavalry and Mo Saber Unit hear my order. Wuxian Cavalry, take the left flank, and prepare to attack at any moment. Mo Saber Unit hold the line. No one is allowed to move without my order. In a few short moments, Wang Chong had issued one order after another, and it was like he had taken a tranquilizer, the entire army suddenly calming down. All the soldiers had determined expressions and bright eyes, as if they had found their pillar of support. They stared at the Arab army, their eyes bright and determined, their eyes devoid of fear. Iron Wall Army, get ready. 2nd unit, prepare to attack at any moment. 23rd unit, 27th unit, 29th unit, right flank, prepare to attack at any moment. Cavalry, prepare to attack at any moment. Banahan, Gully 3rd and 5th unit, prepare to attack at any moment. Almost at the same time, another voice came from the side. Gao Xinji's expression was solemn, as he issued a series of orders. With these orders, the Anqi Protectorate Army and the mercenaries swiftly began to move. And among all the soldiers and horses, there was an army that was fully clad in greenish-black armor, that stood out from head to toe. There weren't many people in this group, only about 4,000 or so. However, the aura they exuded was extremely powerful, giving off a feeling of steel and unstoppable. Every single one of them was like a wall of steel, causing others to feel intimidated just by looking at them. The Iron Wall Army. This was the most elite force of the Anqi Protectorate Army. Gao Xinji had spent 10-some years to forge this powerful army. In terms of pure strength, this army was on par with Geshu Han's Divine Martial Army, and Sichuan's Dragon Stallion Army, and Zhang Shougui's Celestial Military Governor Army, perhaps even a little stronger. In the previous battles, Gao Xinji had been able to use his 60 to 70,000 soldiers to resist Abu Muslim's torrential assault, even turning the tides at the most perilous junctures and pushing back wave after wave, all because of this elite army. These were Gao Xinji's true personal guards, the Anchor of Anqi. But after 2 months of fierce fighting, charging into the most intense and cruel battlefront again and again, the Iron Wall Army had paid an enormous price, especially when Abu Muslim personally led his army to the top of the wall. The Iron Wall Army had suffered grievous casualties, its numbers dropping from 8,000 to 4,000. Moreover, not a single one of the remaining 4,000 soldiers had not been heavily wounded. In the end, the Iron Wall Army only had several hundred soldiers who could actually fight. In the following battles, Gao Xinji had left them in the city to recuperate. Even at the most intense moments of the battle, he had not used them. After more than a month, and the large amounts of medicine that Wang Chong had brought with him, the Iron Wall Army had finally recovered and regained its fighting strength. In this battle, this army had been Gao Xinji's greatest reliance. Although their numbers had decreased sharply, the remaining 4,000 Iron Wall warriors were all elites among elites, and they still possessed a terrifying deterrent force, as they had managed to survive more than 2 months of fierce battles. The army was silent and solemn, the entire Tang dynasty camp silent, but an enormous energy was exploding from it. At this moment, the enormous war machine that was the Tang dynasty finally revealed a hint of savage light. In the distance, the earth quaked and metal clattered, as the 400,000 soldiers got closer and closer to Talas. Finally, when they were still 7 or 8 li from Talas, that surging flood of steel finally came to a stop. Above the 400,000 soldiers, 4 banners fluttered in the wind. On these 4 banners was a black Nile, a black crescent moon, a blazing hellfire, and a black scimitar of flames. These 4 banners represented the 4 most outstanding commanders of the Arabian Empire. At this moment, under the 4 war flags, 4 figures with majestic auras stood under the huge war flags like mountains and oceans. Abu Muslim, is this the army of the Tang dynasty you spoke of? Beneath the banner, Governor Osman of Cairo's eyes widened as he spoke. Osman had originally not been very interested in this eastern expedition. He had always felt that the news from Talas had been exaggerated, or perhaps a portion of it had been fabricated by his old friend to cover up his own mistakes. But on this journey, Osman had been forced to admit that although the Tang dynasty of the Eastern world was not very famous in Arabia, all of Arabia, including himself, had probably underestimated it. The scouts of this empire were extremely elite. Because of an insufficient estimate, they had almost escaped and successfully delivered the information, thus ruining the Arabian plan. Later on, in order to deal with these scouts, Osman had been forced to mobilize 19 of the best divine archers of the Arabian Empire to suppress them. But even so, one of the scouts had managed to escape. Not only that, although the Tang dynasty army only had 60,000 some soldiers, it exuded a steady, dignified, and somber aura that Osman had never seen before. Not even the Sassanid dynasty could compare to it. Abu Muslim nodded, his expression extremely solemn as he looked forward. The Eastern world is extremely mysterious, and we are not familiar with it. Although this Tang army only has 60,000 soldiers, almost all of the survivors are elites. Everyone must be careful. Haha. No matter where these Tang people come from or how powerful they are, I am not interested in them. There is no army that our Mamelukes cannot conquer. I am only interested in one thing. Whereas the Wuxia steel, equipped Tang dynasty cavalry, and the Tang dynasty commander who defeated you? Ibak suddenly spurred his horse forward, his eyes cold as he spoke. In Ibak's view, ordinary battles were no longer enough to satisfy the Mamelukes. Only by defeating the strongest armies of the world could the Mamelukes establish their undefeatable glory. Lord Ibak, it's the cavalry on the left flank. The one riding a red warhorse with a body as sturdy as a mountain is their leader. In addition, these Eastern infidels have a kind of ballista with astonishing destructive power. My lord, you must be careful. Ziyad's voice suddenly rang out as he interjected. Chapter 1062. Abu Muslim, be at ease. I will personally defeat the Tang dynasty army for you, destroy Talas, and flatten the first obstacle in your path to the east. Ibak coldly sneered. I have no doubts about the strength of the Mamelukes, but I hope that you will pay attention to that young commander of the Tang dynasty. Abu Muslim's eyes were calm. From the moment he had appeared, his gaze had not rested on anyone else, but on that young figure behind the first defense line. In addition, Mazel and his Mamelukes died at the hands of that Tang dynasty commander. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden silence under the war flag. Not many people in the Arabian Empire knew of Mazel, but there was almost no one who did not know of the behemoth army. Not even Ibak dared to say that the Mamelukes could rely on their advantage in numbers to deal with the behemoth army. In a flash, Ibak, Osman, and Abu Muslim all turned to look at Wang Chong as if they had been attracted by a magnet. There's no harm in being careful. I've already notified the Uzan and Western Turks in the Eastern world. They have a deep understanding of the Tang people. With their help, we can completely defeat the Tang people. Abu Muslim said. There's no need for such trouble. At this moment, a cold and firm voice resounded in everyone's ears. Beneath the black banner of flame, the dazzling golden armor of Qutayba slowly stepped forward, his eyes cold and his lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile, as he rode up from the rear. Abu Muslim, you've truly disappointed me. A single battle has made you so fearful of the slightest danger. It seems like I truly overestimated you. Buzz. Abu Muslim, Ibak, and Osman paled at these words and turned to Qutayba. Vice-Governor Ziyad's face was trembling in fear, and his complexion was extremely nasty. As Abu Muslim's left and right arms, they had fought side by side for 10 years. Ziyad had a deep respect and reverence for Abu Muslim. In the past, if anyone dared to insult Abu Muslim in front of Ziyad, Ziyad would have already attacked to protect Abu Muslim's reputation. But no matter how dissatisfied Ziyad was, he had no choice but to swallow his dissatisfaction. The governor of war, Qutayba, he was the strongest governor of the Arabian Empire, possessing terrifying strength and the finest soldiers under his command. Not even Abu Muslim or Ziyad could compare to him. In the Arabian Empire, Qutayba possessed indisputable strength. I don't know anything about Wuxia and the Western Turks. The Arabian Empire doesn't need such weak allies to conquer a country. Pass on my order, Qutayba coldly said. But my lord, Ziyad still wanted to say something, but Abu Muslim quickly cut him off. Qutayba, we'll do as you say, Abu Muslim said. Qutayba only glanced at Abu Muslim for a moment before turning around and vanishing into the army. My lord, Qutayba is going too far. They've never interacted with the Tang people, nor do they know how formidable they are. Uzan and the Western Turks are already on the way. Can't they even wait 2 days? Once Qutayba had vanished, Ziyad indignantly said, Ziyad, we've already lost Talas. We've lost the right to speak in this battle. Abu Muslim shook his head and slowly said, Ziyad, we've already lost Talas. Arabia was an extremely realistic and cruel country. Everything was decided by strength. No matter how great the reputation and prestige of the governor of Iron and Blood had been, a defeat was a defeat, and a loser had no right to argue. And although Qutayba is arrogant, there's no doubting his strength. With the soldiers under his command and our support, even if the Uzan and the Western Turks haven't arrived, we might still be able to defeat the Tang people. As long as we can conquer the entire Eastern world, my personal grudges with Qutayba are insignificant. Pass on my order. Prepare for battle. Abu Muslim waved his hand. Yes. Ziyad had a complicated expression on his face, and after a few moments of hesitation, he finally left to carry out the order. While the Arabs were observing the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong Gao Xianji, and the others were also observing this unprecedentedly powerful Arab army. My lord, the Arabs are preparing to move. Xue Qianjun suddenly said next to Wang Chong. Pass on my order. Prepare for battle. Boom. At this moment, the blare of a horn came from the distant Arab camp. In an instant, the mood changed and all sound vanished. Rumble. The earth quaked as the halted Arab army began to move once more. The 400,000 soldiers once more advancing toward Talas with a momentum that seemed capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas. Clang! At the very front of the army, an Arab general with sharp eyes suddenly trembled. There was a clattering of metal as a dark moon war halo erupted from the feet of his warhorse. This halo was enormous, and it rapidly expanded from his feet to the tens of thousands of Arab soldiers behind him. As if acting as a signal, clang clang clang. Sharp rays of light began to shoot out from beneath the warhorses of the Arab cavalry. Unlike the Arab cavalry, the halos beneath these horsemen were twice as large, and the energy they exuded was even more dazzling and powerful. From a distance, one could even smell the oppressive stench of blood. Buzz! A second later, all the Tang dynasty soldiers watched as a dark shadow suddenly shot out of the ground, surging toward Talas like a tide. In a flash, the Arab cavalry seemed to be covered in a layer of mysterious black fog, fusing with each other and making them difficult to identify. Broom! The 400,000 Arab cavalry surged forward like an avalanche, their speed exploding as they charged toward the Tang soldiers. They were traveling with incredible speed. At the start, they were still 6 li away, but in the blink of an eye, they had crossed several thousand feet and were still rapidly advancing. Buzz! Wang Chong's eyes widened at this sight. So fast. Abu Muslim's army could never advance at such a terrifying speed. Wang Chong was sure that this was the army of that Arab war god Qutayba. What powerful strength! Wang Chong looked forward, his expression extremely solemn. This charge was so concentrated that it was almost tangible. Just this point alone was enough to surpass the vast majority of armies in this world. And not even Abu Muslim's army could compare. Wang Chong. At this moment, a voice rang out in his ear. Cheng Qianli had stopped his horse at Wang Chong's side. His eyes focused on a certain place in the sky, his expression extremely grave. Wang Chong followed his gaze and saw that the Arab army had been shrouded in shadows at the start. But now, an invisible energy seemed to engulf the world, creating a sandstorm. This was clearly a powerful army that had simultaneously cultivated some kind of powerful technique and raised it to the limit to produce an illusion. The enemy we're facing this time is probably even stronger than we imagined, Cheng Qianli muttered. In his many years of campaigning in the western regions, Cheng Qianli had seen many powerful armies, but none of them, not even the Western Turks or the Uzan, had ever displayed such astonishing momentum. From a certain perspective, this was already similar to the formation phenomena of cavalry formations. We've all underestimated Arabia. The Tang dynasty has always limited itself to the borders of the Central Plains and never paid much attention to Arabia. We know far too little about them. This empire is far more difficult to deal with than we imagined, Cheng Qianli grimly said. It wasn't that the Tang dynasty had never interacted with Arabia, but their interactions were mostly economic and trade. A caravan would take a long time to transport goods, a round trip taking at least 6 months. As for those chubby and charmingly naive Arab merchants in the capital, they only knew that they were extremely wealthy and had access to corals, agates, jadeite jade gems. The Tang dynasty knew almost nothing about Arabia. Arabia, on the other hand, had a much greater understanding of the Tang dynasty. Arab caravans could enter the Tang dynasty, but Tang dynasty caravans could rarely enter Khorasan, much less Baghdad. I also cannot escape the blame for this matter. As the Anchi Protector General, I patrol the western regions for many years, but I only have a limited understanding of Arabia, much less anyone else. After a long period of silence, Gao Xianji sighed, a look of self-blame on his face. There were many reasons why Gao Xianji had not gone to gather information on Arabia in his 10-some years of guarding the western regions. The power structure of the western regions was complex, and suppressing the kingdoms of the western regions had consumed far too much of his energy. Moreover, Arabia and the Tang dynasty were far apart, and there were many small kingdoms in between. But no matter what, these were all excuses. After this battle, whether we win or lose, if we are lucky enough to survive, I will definitely submit a memorial to the imperial court and think of a way to expand the horizons of the Tang people of the Central Plains, so that they can see the world beyond the Central Plains and gain a greater understanding of Arabia and the other kingdoms. Gao Xianji sternly said, Lord Protector General, now is not the time to talk about this. It won't be too late to talk about it after we defeat the Arabs. Moreover, the Arabs aren't that strong. Wang Chong suddenly said, his eyes suddenly turning profound. The Arabs truly were powerful, but the Tang dynasty was not an opponent that Arabia had ever encountered. No matter what, we must win this battle. Chapter 1063. Ready. Wang Chong's order was quickly followed by the creaking of gears. At the very front of the defense line, in the second line of the army, the ballista soldiers got down on one knee and began to load ballista bolts into the ballista with extremely practiced movements. At the same time, the soldiers in front of the steel wall began to push the bolts into the front of the beehives. Boom! Boom! The shield-wielding soldiers at the very front leaned forward, their left feet resting on their shields while their right feet straightened. Stellar energy flowed through their meridians as they began to build up strength. At almost the same time, clang clang clang. Cold blood-red light flashed through the black storm as the Arab cavalry at the very front pulled out their weapons. These were dark red Arabian scimitars, each one more than 3 feet long. They were twice the size of a normal Arabian scimitar, but they were also twice as heavy. The Crimson Moon scimitars. These were the weapons used by the Crimson Moon vanguard of Qutaybah's first line. These weapons had been forged by the best Arabian smiths for 3,000 days and nights, adding in many precious metals in between to create these weapons. These weapons were extremely heavy and required enormous arm strength to use. Moreover, these weapons had been used by many Arab armies, but it was the first line under Qutayba's command, the Crimson Moon Vanguard, that was able to display their full power and make them famous in Arabia. Each soldier of the Crimson Moon Vanguard had been carefully selected for their outstanding arm strength. In their hands, the heavy Crimson Moon scimitars were as easy to wield as their own limbs, and they were able to bring out the bloodthirsty nature of the Crimson Moon scimitars. It was precisely for this reason that Qutayba valued the Crimson Moon Vanguard even more. Whenever he attacked a city, he would often send out the Crimson Moon Vanguard as the first wave. And very few people knew that when the Crimson Moon scimitars first came out of the furnace, they were a dazzling silver white, just like the silver moon in the sky. But because the Crimson Moon Vanguard had killed so many people, they had turned dark red. Every time they swung the scimitars, the air would be filled with the stench of blood. This thick and suffocating stench of blood could also cause immense pressure to opponents with weak willpower. Ka'il, with the Crimson Moon Vanguard leading the charge, countless savage Arab cavalry charged toward the first defense line. 30,000 zhang, 20,000 zhang, 1,000 zhang. The countless Arab cavalry crashed into the Tang dynasty's steel defense line like a massive wave. Rumble! In that instant, heaven and earth shattered, and all of the steel city walls began to tremble. Even though Zhang Shouji had used tens of thousands of kilograms of iron and rocks to reinforce the walls, the entire steel wall still couldn't help but tremble violently. Buzz! As the vast Arab army crashed into the Tang dynasty's defense line, Wang Chang's eyes flashed with cold light, and he stomped his foot down. Hong! That stomp seemed to weigh over 10,000 kilograms, and the entire ground was unable to endure such a terrifying force, causing it to tremble violently like a great wave. In a flash, a white ripple shot out from Wang Chang's foot and assailed the entire Arab army. Bzz! Time seemed to stop. As countless people watched, the sandstorm that had engulfed the Arab army and concealed them instantly vanished. And under the feet of the Arabs, that shadowy wave-like figure on the ground also vanished. Boom! There was a heaven-shaking boom as the Crimson Moon Vanguard bore the brunt of the attack, the halos beneath their feet shuddering. In a flash, the light was extinguished and the effect of the war halo was halved. Behind the Crimson Moon Vanguard, the tens of thousands of Arab cavalry were even more affected. In the blink of an eye, the halos extending from the feet of these hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry began to flicker like candles in the wind under the effects of the bane of the battlefield halo. In the neigh, war horses neighed, and the orderly Arab army instantly fell into chaos. How could this be? In the rear of the army, the eyes of the Arab soldiers guarding the rear almost popped out of their sockets at this sight. In their long history, they had never encountered such a situation. It's that Tang people commander. Beneath the banner of the Nile, Governor Osman's pupils constricted as he grimaced. His eyes were like torches, and in a flash, he had grasped that the root of the problem lay in the young Tang commander behind the steel wall. Interesting. To think that there would be such an ability. After his initial shock, Mamluk commander Ibak licked his lips, an amused look on his face. The Mamelukes were not only obsessed with defeating their strongest foes, but also extremely interested in enemy commanders with special abilities. This ability is very special, but it's not impossible to deal with. Leave this person to me. At this moment, Governor Osman's eyes flashed with cold light as he attacked. Boom! An enormous energy exploded from Osman's body and soared into the sky. At the same time, there was a metallic clatter, and a halo of thick and pitch-black steel began to radiate out from Osman's feet, spreading to the feet of every Arab soldier. The chaos caused by the weakening of the halos was quickly pacified, and everything returned to its original state. An insignificant trick. Only SOL. Osman's eyes were suffused with disdain and cold laughter. But before he could finish speaking, another invisible energy rippled out. The army that Osman had calmed down began to tremble once more. Without any warning, the auras of all the generals suddenly dropped, and the degree of weakening was even greater than before. 1, 2, 3, 4. All the Arab generals were affected by the halos, their auras rapidly weakening. Without the support of these general halos, the auras of the thousands of Arab cavalry began to weaken, and the sandstorm that had just appeared in the air once more vanished with a pop. The general halo. Wang Chong looked down from atop his white-hoofed shadow, his eyes bright and his expression frigid. To a certain extent, the bane of the battlefield aura could be nullified. However, it would require a general-level character to do so. However, it was not so easy to nullify the effects of a general aura. At this level, even a general-level character would find it difficult to nullify the effects of a general aura. Whether it was the bane of the battlefield halo, or the general halo, the opposing great general would have to expend a significant amount of energy in order to neutralize the effects of these two halos. Let me see just how strong you are, Wang Chong indifferently said to himself as he stared across from him. In the distant Arab camp, Abu Muslim, Osman Ibak, all of them were paying close attention to this battle. If the appearance of the first halo had not been too noteworthy, then the appearance of the second halo was like a fierce slap to Governor Osman's face. Damn thing! Osman's face changed crazily. He clenched his teeth, and without the slightest hesitation rumbled. Another dark red ring of light, thick like blood, shot out from his body, descending to support the entire battlefield. As one of the most powerful and illustrious governors of the Arabian Empire, Osman rarely gave his army two powerful halos in a row without personally taking action. Even for a powerful governor like Osman, using two halos at the same time was no small burden. But Osman had a proud personality, and he would never allow himself to lose to an Eastern infidel commander. But in the next moment, something that Osman couldn't believe happened. Under the support of the second halo, all of the generals' auras suddenly rose by a level. But it was only a level. They still hadn't returned to their original state. This is impossible. At this moment even Ibak grimaced. He had known Osman for a long time, and knew just how powerful he was. Osman might not be as strong as the governor of war Qutayba, or the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim. But other than top-class governors, he had very few opponents. To be able to force out two powerful halos from Osman, and still be unable to eliminate the negative effects on his soldiers, meant that this young commander of the Tang people was far stronger than he had imagined. Osman, I'll help you. Ibak's eyes flashed with cold light as he suddenly attacked. Boom! Ibak's body paused for a moment, and in a flash of light, a silver-white halo as thick as water began to spread across the battlefield. The combined strength of Osman and Ibak had barely managed to neutralize the negative effects on the generals, but the halos of these generals had still been significantly weakened. Wang Chong's battle with Osman and Ibak seemed to last a long time, but in reality, only a few moments had passed. In front of the steel defense line, the two armies had already clashed. Release! A youthful and icy voice resounded over the battlefield. Chen Bin stood upright on a transport carriage with ballistae mounted on it, his sword swinging down. Boom! 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 The earth roared as black ballista bolts shot forward like furious dragons, bursting with destructive energy as they pierced through the air and into the Arab army. Bang bang bang! Ballista bolts pierced through flesh, each one accompanied by the whinnying of horses and the screams of Arab soldiers. In just one volley, 6,000 to 7,000 Arab cavalry had fallen to the ground along with their horses. Behind them, the dense horde of Arab cavalry charged over and trampled over them. Those Arabs who were still breathing were instantly killed by the trampling of the war horses. In the first phase of the battle, the Tang dynasty had won, but they had also paid an enormous price. Tens of thousands of soldiers had died and countless weapons had been destroyed, including the ballistae that the Tang dynasty was so proud of. After the war, even though Zhang Shouji and the others had done their utmost to repair the 3,000 some of the powerful Tang dynasty ballistae, they had only been able to assemble a little more than 1,000 Tang dynasty ballistae. The sharp decline in the number of ballistae had forced Chen Bin to change his strategy. Chen Bin had waited for a long time for this volley, choosing not to fire as he usually did. Instead, he waited for the moment when the soldiers were the most concentrated and fired from the most optimal angle. In Ney, warhorses neighed. As more than 7,000 Arab cavalry were shot down, the rest of the cavalry in the rear began to charge forward, causing an even greater disturbance. Chapter 1064. Release! 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 Chen Bin's eyes were resolute as he swung his sword again and again, the angle and position of each shot having been rehearsed and calculated in his mind. Ever since he had been captured by de Wuxia, Chen Bin seemed to have been washed clean and tempered by fire. He had become more composed, stronger, and more like a general. Although there were only 1,000 Tang dynasty ballistae in Chen Bin's hands, the power they could display could not even be mentioned in the same breath as before. Nay, amidst the howling winds and neighing warhorses, row after row of Arab cavalry were felled. But even so, not even the fiercest of attacks could stop the advance of the Arabs. As the ballistae attacked, the countless Arab cavalry roared and charged like a storm against the Arab shields. Bum bum bum. The clattering of metal seemed capable of rupturing one's eardrums. Kill! Kill these infidels! The earth rumbled and the gloomy sky glimmered with cold light. As far as the eye could see, the ground was covered in a dense sea of Arab cavalry, their shouts, and clanging of weapons. Bang! Amidst the intense neighing sound, a warhorse charged forward like a storm. The warhorse's huge metal paws flickered with rays of metallic light, and with lightning speed, it heavily smashed into the heavy shields of the first row of infantrymen that were taller than a person. Boom! There was an earth-shaking metallic clatter as the massive shields trembled, a small dent appearing on them. The Tang dynasty shield man behind the shields was forced to take a small step back, the blood in his chest in turmoil. It wasn't that they had never fought with the Arabs before, but this group of Arab cavalry was far stronger than any they had encountered before. Roar! Suddenly, there was a roar as the veins on the forehead of this Tang shield soldier, who had suffered a powerful impact, bulged. With a roar, he stepped forward with his right foot, lowered his head, and tensed all the muscles in his body like steel bars as he fiercely pushed forward. Bum bum bum. The moment this Tang shield man finished his work, more and more Arab cavalry began to charge at him, like a torrential rain. The body of the infantryman behind the heavy shield kept trembling. Every collision caused great damage to his body. The defensive aura, sturdy aura, and barrier aura under his feet kept shaking like a candle flickering in the wind. However, the infantryman clenched his teeth and stubbornly held on. No one who had survived this long in battle was weak. Even though his opponents were powerful, this veteran shield man of the Tang dynasty was still able to rely on his rich experience to firmly hold off the frenzied barrage of attacks. Kill! At almost the same time, cries filled the air. At the other positions of the first defense line, tens of thousands of Arab cavalry covered the sky as they launched an all-out assault on the Tang defense line. Translated by Hypersheep 325. The soldiers that Qutayba had brought from the northern war zone were unimaginably powerful. Even though Wang Yan's infantry had been tempered by fire for so long and possessed such formidable defenses that not even Abu Muslim's army could break through, they had finally met their match. Boom! There was a sound of impact, followed by the clang of metal and the screams of soldiers. Behind the defensive line, a veteran shield-bearer under Wang Yan's command was thrown high into the air along with his shield, flying towards the rear of the army. A gap had appeared in the tight defense line. Up! The eyes of the elites of the Crimson Moon Vanguard flashed with cold light as they noticed this sight. 3 high-ranking warriors of the Crimson Moon Vanguard immediately changed directions and galloped off in 3 different directions. Behind them, the other cavalry of the Crimson Moon Vanguard had also sensed this opening. Almost instinctively, they converged into a torrent of steel and charged toward the gap left behind by the Tang shield man in the arrow formation. As Qutayba's experienced and capable vanguard, the soldiers of the Crimson Moon Vanguard had all been trained to an extremely high level. On the intense battlefield, each soldier could keenly sense an opening in their foe's defense and gather together to widen the gap. This was also the reason why the Crimson Moon Vanguard had been used by Qutayba as his vanguard to repeatedly tear through the enemy defense line. Buzz! Wang Yan's eyes widened at this sight, and he grimaced. Although this was only the first wave of contact, Wang Yan and all the soldiers under his command immediately felt a strong pressure. These new Arab soldiers were completely different from the ones that had arrived before. They were far more aggressive and aggressive. Second column, clang! Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Yan suddenly unsheathed his sword and gave the order, and his expression became extremely solemn at this instant. He did not dare to be careless in the face of these Arab cavalry. Roar, let me! Not long after Wang Yan gave the order, a roar came from the second column. A tall and sturdy backup shield soldier suddenly shouted loudly. His body suddenly lowered, and like a tiger or leopard, he held the heavy shield in his hands. And with a few strides he fiercely charged forward. Boom! The heavy shield struck the charging Crimson Moon Vanguard, striking the chest of his warhorse, and sending it flying with a cry of alarm from Nay. Western barbarians, scram for me! The sturdy shieldman bellowed. Without dodging, he crouched down and charged at the 3 Crimson Moon Vanguards charging from the rear. In an instant, the wind howled, and 3 Crimson Moon Vanguard warriors were caught off guard. When they were hit by the giant shield, it was as if they had been hit by a cannonball. Their bodies trembled as they were knocked out of the first defense line. The tremendous force even caused one of the Crimson Moon Vanguard warriors to lose his balance. Open for me! In the blink of an eye, the tall and strong shield-bearer raised his shield up high, and then slammed it down heavily. The leg of the shield was inserted into the ground, and his body leaned forward. His legs spread out, firmly pressing against the heavy steel shield that weighed several hundred kilograms. At the critical moment, he quickly patched up the gap that was opened. Shield guard. Wang Yan had inherited the Wang clan's art of war. Everything he did had its rules and regulations, upholding strict order. The infantry defense was like a fortress, and the fortress's safety did not rest on the shoulders of a single person, but on layers of soldiers. Once there was a major gap, the infantrymen at the rear would immediately react and quickly fill in the gap. Like this, the whole army was like a fortress, and there was no possibility of it collapsing. This was also one of the characteristics of the era, when infantrymen dominated. In this aspect, the infantrymen led by Wang Yan could be said to be true soldiers of 100 battles. And the infantrymen used to deal with these special situations were the shield men, which was specially set up by Wang Yan. Boom, boom, boom. Just as the shield men rushed forward to fill in the gap, countless warhorses surged forward. The dense horseshoes were raised high and stomped heavily on the shield, but all of them were blocked. Then, a cold light flashed, and sharp Crimson Moon scimitars slashed down like a storm, constantly chopping down on the heavy steel shield. There was a series of ear-piercing metal clangs as the heavy Crimson Moon scimitars chopped down, leaving sharp marks on the heavy steel shield. Hiss! Seeing this, all the shield men of the Tang dynasty couldn't help but feel their eyelids twitch, and their expressions changed. The shield men stood at the very front of the army, the lifeline of the army. As the basic equipment of shield men, the most basic requirement was that they be tough, dense, and difficult to destroy. Thus, all the heavy shields were made from the best materials. For these unique red scimitars to be able to leave such deep marks on the steel shields showed how sharp they were. Everyone hold on. Order after order was issued, and at this moment, every shield man was under an inconceivable pressure. But as the most experienced and battle-hardened unit of the Arabian Empire's north, the Crimson Moon Vanguard had far more tricks up its sleeves. Nay, behind the Crimson Moon Vanguard, a Crimson Moon cavalry with a red saber and shield emblem on their chest suddenly pulled on their reins. Their cold eyes stared ahead as they lowered their bodies. Suddenly, they charged forward in a short distance, their speed soaring to the limit. Rumble! Under the gazes of countless onlookers, the war horses of these special Crimson Moon cavalry stomped on the backs of the horses in front of them, and suddenly leapt high into the air. As countless Tang soldiers looked on in shock, they flew over the high shields and steel walls, descending like a divine soldier into the Tang army behind the defense line. Translated by Hypersheep 325. Rumble, rumble, rumble. An earth-shattering explosion sounded out. Smoke and dust billowed within the army, and men and horses were thrown off their feet. Screams rang out, and it immediately caused chaos. 1, 2, 3. Over 100 elites of the Crimson Moon Vanguard became one, charging over the high walls and into the army formation. Crimson Leap. This was a unique skill of the Crimson Moon Vanguard, and it was specifically targeted at infantry and shieldman formations. The Tang dynasty was not the first empire the Crimson Moon Vanguard had encountered to use infantry formations and massive shields. In the countries conquered by the governor of war, Qutayba, they had encountered far too many such formations. The Crimson Leap was used to break through the shieldman formation. For this reason, Qutayba had even equipped the war horses of the Crimson Moon Vanguard with thick armor to protect their bellies, which were the most vulnerable to the Crimson Leap. Kill them. At this moment, a roar came from the center of the formation. Wang Chang's big brother, Wang Fu, stood in the middle of the formation, his expression cold and resolute. In a flash, countless axemen formed groups of 10 some, working together to surround the Crimson Moon Vanguard. Before the Crimson Moon Vanguard could cause chaos, they had surrounded them. Chapter 1065. Kill. From all directions, countless sabers and axes flashed with a cold light, and at the same time, they chopped down at an astonishing speed. Even the Crimson Moon Vanguard couldn't help but grimace in the face of this incredible reaction and teamwork. As the vanguard under Qutayba's command, they had encountered many powerful foes. But no matter how powerful they had always been able to create a considerable amount of chaos in the enemy ranks, creating opportunities for the army in the rear. But these Tang people from the east were completely different from any opponent they had encountered before. Although their war horses had charged through the defense line, they had been surrounded in less than a second, unable to use their charge. They had never even imagined such a situation, much less encountered one. Clang, clang, clang. Sabers flashed and swords flashed, and in the blink of an eye, the Crimson Moon Vanguard began to battle with 10 some axemen. Their scarlet scimitars left bloody trails in the air, as they clashed with the sabers and axes around them. Amidst the ear-piercing sound of metal, the huge axes and sabers collided with the Crimson Moon scimitar, immediately leaving huge nicks on the blades. Even the heavy armor of the axe-wielders was split open, and blood splashed everywhere. Under the attack of the Crimson Moon scimitar, several executioners retreated with serious injuries. But the Crimson Moon Vanguard also began to fall to the enemy's attacks. The governor of war, Qutayba, clad in golden armor and shrouded in golden light beneath the blazing infernal flame banner, couldn't help but frown, but he said nothing. At the same time, far away, Wang Chang's eyes were also twitching. He had not interfered in this battle, only been observing. This Arab army of the northern war zone was far more formidable than he had imagined. Their attacks, defense-piercing abilities, and ferocity had all reached astonishing levels. There was no doubt that this would be the greatest test the Tang dynasty would ever face. "My lord, should we send out the Mo Saber unit?" The Anqi Protectorate Army's No. 3 commander, Shi Yuanqing, stopped his horse at Wang Chang's side and spoke. The Arab attacks came in wave after wave, swift and fierce, and the Crimson Moon Vanguard was only the tip of the iceberg. This made everyone, including Qing Qianli and Shi Yuanqing, feel an enormous pressure. This was something that hadn't happened in the first phase of the battle. No need. Wang Chong shook his head. His eyes were as calm as water, and there was not the slightest fluctuation in them. Now is not the time to use the Mo Saber squad. Inform the armies of Greater and Lesser Valor, as well as the front column, to prepare to attack. In addition, inform the 2nd platoon of shield bearers to be ready to replace them at any time. The 3rd platoon of shield bearers should be on standby at any time. What was hard was easy to break. The Arabs had come with all this momentum, and this was the moment when their momentum was at its sharpest. At this time, we should focus on exhausting their spirit. It's not advisable to engage in a large-scale battle with them. Yes. A hint of respect flashed through Shi Yuanqing's eyes as he left to carry out the order. After defeating the behemoth army, Wang Chong's reputation in the Anqi Protectorate army was like the noon sun, no less than that of Gao Xianji. From top to bottom, even Protector General Gao Xianji treated him with the utmost respect, let alone the others. As the winds howled and surged, Wang Chong looked at the endless sea of Arabs, a slight ripple of emotion in his eyes. In the art of war, there were illusions and realities. Not only did it involve changes in battle tactics, but it also involved changes in strategy. The Arabs had far too many soldiers. Sometimes not just in terms of quality, but in numbers could also exert enormous pressure. Moreover, the Arabs had been marching day and night, and this was the moment when their momentum was at its peak. At this moment, it was simply unwise to engage in direct confrontation with them. The best course of action was to maintain a stalemate and take the initiative to defend, wearing down the enemy's spirit as best as it could be. This was the principle of the first spurt of energy, the second wane, and the third exhaustion. The third column of shieldmen, that Wang Chong had selected from the elites of the Anqi Protectorate army, had been formed to carry out this strategy. Buzz! Wang Chong quickly regained his composure and looked forward. The armor there rumbled as Wang Chong's order was quickly carried out. Release! With a heaven-shaking roar, the upright figures of the infantry in front of the army began to pull on the mechanisms on the walls. Rumble! In that instant the earth quaked and the air shrieked. The seemingly ordinary wall of steel, which had only been used for defense, suddenly became riddled with holes. Hundreds of thousands of arrows suddenly shot out from behind the first line of defense. The beehives. Although the walls had long ago been equipped with these concentrated firing weapons, Wang Chong had not used them. Only when the Arabs reached the walls did he suddenly unleash them. The Arabs were different from any of his previous opponents. Their forging skills were far superior, and in some aspects, they had even surpassed the Tang dynasty in forging steel. The beehives had a short range, far inferior to the ballistae, and the farther away they were, the less powerful they were. Thus, Wang Chong had learned his lesson, and had not used any of the beehives in the Arab charge. Only when the Arabs and the Tang dynasty clashed did the first defense line become a sea of Arabs. They were almost face to face with the beehives on the walls, with not the slightest gap between them. At this distance, the beehives were at their strongest. Only now did Wang Chong use this king of short-range weapons. Thud thud thud. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of thousands of arrows had struck the Arab soldiers at the very front. Each warhorse had been hit by 40 to 50 ballista bolts. At such a short distance, even metal could be shot through, much less warhorses. Nye! Thud! Thud! The sounds of horses falling to the ground filled the air, as the Arab cavalry in front of the steel walls fell to the ground. In just a few seconds, Arab corpses had piled up in front of the steel walls, their blood staining the earth. Bang! The Arab soldiers in the rear were in an uproar at this sight. When the hundreds of thousands of arrows covered the sky and the earth, everyone was stunned. How could this be? How could the East have such a terrifying weapon? It's too inconceivable. Just what is that? All the Arab soldiers in the rear were stunned. The appearance of this weapon had been far too sudden. No one had ever encountered such a weapon before. These Eastern ballista bolts fired from the steel walls were unimaginably exquisite, and for the first time, these proud and conceited Arab warriors felt an intense sense of mystery. Although the Arabs were extremely skilled at forging, they had never created such a powerful weapon of mass destruction. The Arab soldiers who had been transferred from other war zones in this Eastern expedition had originally viewed this so-called Eastern world, this so-called Tang dynasty, with a lofty attitude. But after seeing these things, the last bit of arrogance in their hearts had dissipated. No matter what the truth of these Tang dynasty people was, there was one thing that could be confirmed. These Tang people of Talas were definitely a formidable foe that could not be underestimated. How could this be? Abu Muslim, why didn't you mention this in your reports? Governor Osman of Cairo finally couldn't help but ask under the black banner of the Nile. Abu Muslim said nothing, But Ziad had an embarrassed look on his face. In truth, he had already given them all this information on the Tang dynasty in his letters, but Osman, Ibak, and Qutayba had all been too conceited and arrogant to carefully read them. In the end, these governors had never fought with the Tang dynasty, so no matter how detailed the letters had been, they could not compare to experiencing it for themselves. On the other side, Osman was startled by the two's reactions. However, he quickly recovered from his shock and became speechless. Even the strongest weapon can't replace soldiers. It's just a measly 60,000 soldiers. If we send even more soldiers, I don't believe that they can make much of a splash. Ibak's voice came from the rear. Arabia had never been a country that cherished the lives of its soldiers. As long as they could achieve their goal and subdue the Tang people, the deaths of a few more soldiers were no big deal. Whether it was Ibak, Osman, or Abu Muslim, none of them were commanders who treated their soldiers like their own children. This was completely different from the commanders of the Central Plains. In the Battle of Khorasan, the Arabs had paid an enormous price to subdue the remnants of the Sassanid dynasty. But these three commanders had not hesitated in the slightest. They had not even creased their brows. Kill. Ibak's order was quickly carried out. The four commanders did not hesitate, and the vast sea of Arab soldiers once more roared and pressed forward. More and more soldiers rushed towards the first line of defense like water flooding a golden mountain. Rumble. The earth quaked and the mountains swayed, as the only sound in the sky above Talas became the only sound. Even though the beehives were extremely powerful, they were still far from being able to deal any significant damage to the more than 400,000 soldiers of the Arab army. Bang bang bang. Countless Arab soldiers pushed through the attacks of the beehives and charged forward. Not only that, the cavalry within the ranks of the Arab army swiftly responded. With a thump, the Arab corpses on the ground were tossed into the air by the cavalry and smashed into the spikes of the steel walls. Chapter 1066. The soldiers under Qutayba's command were the vanguard of this battle, and they were also the most experienced soldiers on the battlefield. Even though this was their first time seeing the beehives, all of them had almost instantly found the best way to deal with them. The Arabs, who viewed war and conquest as their mission, had no such thing as comradeship. As long as they could help win the war, they would show no mercy, even if the corpses of their soldiers were turned into porcupines. Thud thud thud. One corpse after another was thrown forward, and in the blink of an eye, more than half of the beehives had been cut off. Damn it! The Tang dynasty generals behind the first defense line all paled at this sight. The Arabs had reacted far too quickly, and their methods were cruel and merciless, completely unexpected. In just a few seconds, these powerful beehives had essentially been crippled. None of them had ever imagined that such a thing could happen. Kill them. No matter how the Tang dynasty reacted, the moment the beehives were stopped, the Arab cavalry began to press forward like a swarm of locusts. Nay, the first defense line was once more hit by a storm of attacks, and the pressure on everyone's shoulders increased. Pikemen attack! A loud and clear voice rang out from the front lines, speaking not in Han, but in greater and lesser valor. Bang! Tens of thousands of pikemen of greater and lesser valor suddenly stepped forward, the sharp spears in their hands piercing through the gaps in the defense line to stab at the shield men in the first line. Plush plush plush. Blood spurted out as the most formidable pikemen of greater and lesser valor displayed their most powerful ability to pierce through armor. One sharp spear after another pierced through the armor of the Arab cavalry, stabbing into their vitals. Plush plush plush. The pikemen lashed out again, and the Arab cavalry and their horses began to fall to the ground. Greater and lesser valor were only small kingdoms in the western regions, but even these small kingdoms had their own unique traits. Back then, in order to hire these spearmen, Wang Chong had paid a large sum of money. Of the 10 million taels of gold allocated by the imperial court, a considerable part was given to greater and lesser valor, and the power of the spearmen was fully displayed at this time. But no matter how formidable the spearmen were, they could not stop the frenzied Arab assault. At the very front of the defensive line, All the shield soldiers were under unimaginable pressure. The muscles on their shoulders were bulging, and the veins were bulging, as if they were about to jump out. Their thighs trembled, every muscle jumping. All of the shield soldiers clenched their teeth, their foreheads dripping with sweat. The consumption of stellar energy was secondary. The consumption of physical strength was the most unbearable. Every shield soldier suffered an unimaginable amount of attacks every second. Second platoon forward. Wang Chong waved his hand and waved the flag. The second platoon's shield bearers immediately rushed forward and smashed their shields into the ground. The shieldmen of the first platoon seemed to be relieved of a heavy burden, and they began to skillfully retreat, their armor drenched in cold sweat. The three platoons had practiced the rotation of the shieldmen countless times, and they could seamlessly, and without any problems. Third platoon forward. A few moments later, with another order, the Anxi Protectorate Army infantry began to replace the shield bearers. Wave after wave of shield bearers was replaced, with one group on the front line, one resting, and one waiting for orders. Everything proceeded in an orderly fashion. Through this method, the first defense line was able to barely hold against the storm of Arab attacks. Rumble! Just when the battle was at its most intense, a massive boom came from the center of the Arab formation. Marquis, look! A voice came from the side. Xue Qianjuan's eyes suddenly widened as he stared ahead. Wang Chong said nothing as he followed Xue Qianjuan's gaze. In the rear of the Arab formation, he saw that something unexpected had occurred. Huge silver-white machines that were more than 3 meters wide and taller than a person could be seen. Behind each silver-white machine, there were 7 to 10 people escorting them as they drove towards the first defense line. These silver weapons appeared extremely heavy, and they made a particularly loud noise as they moved. Although he didn't know what they were, Wang Chong's eyes twitched as he instinctively sensed that something was wrong. Inform Chen Bin to move out quickly. Wang Chong immediately ordered without turning his head. Creak! Creak! Almost at the same time, Chen Bin, who was standing on the military transport vehicle, also noticed the silver-white equipment. His expression was solemn, and his long hair danced rapidly in the air. Release! A sword swung down, leaving a faint scar in the air. Following Chen Bin's order, the more than 1,000 Tang Dynasty ballistae began to change directions. Boom boom boom. There was a metallic clattering as the ballista bolts struck the silver weapons of the Arab army, like dragons emerging from the sea. There was a series of rumbling sounds of steel. Although the dense crossbow bolts hit the silver-white machines, they were quickly blocked, and not even a dent was left on them. Only 30 to 40 Arab soldiers escorting the silver weapons were caught off guard and pierced through by the ballista bolts, dropping to the ground. Adjust the scales to 15. Take aim at the soldiers escorting the silver weapons. Release! Chen Bin's eyes flashed with cold light as he changed tactics. Plush plush plush. Plush plush plush. The ballista bolts showed their effects once more. Screams filled the air as more than 2,000 Arab soldiers, transporting the silver weapons, were shot to death. The ballista bolts did not stop there, killing another 3,000 Arab soldiers. Defend! Shouts in Arabic resounded over the battlefield. Just as the soldiers escorting the silver-white equipment fell to the ground, the huge silver-white equipment began to change rapidly. Amidst the screeching sounds of gears, an enormous silver plate popped out from the left wing, followed by the right wing, and then the top. Soon after, countless fan-shaped steel plates shot out, shielding both the silver weapons and the soldiers behind them. Behind them, countless Arab soldiers began to pour in from the rear. Even some of the cavalry galloping past dismounted and gathered behind the silver weapons. More than 2,000 Arab soldiers escorting the silver weapons have been killed, but even more were pouring in. Not only that, the massive and mysterious silver weapons began to move faster and faster as the Arab soldiers pushed them forward. They were getting closer and closer to the first defense line. Wuxian cavalry, get ready! Wang Chong's eyes widened as he immediately ordered. Iron Wall Army, get ready! At almost the same time, another voice came from nearby. Gao Xinji had a solemn expression on his face as he gave the same order. He looked forward with an extremely grave expression. Just like Wang Chong, he also sensed an immense danger from these silver weapons. Whoosh! The silver weapons in the rear of the Arab army were getting faster and faster, getting closer and closer to the steel walls. The air was instantly fraught with tension. The rumbling of the wheels seemed to weigh heavily on the hearts of the Arabs. In front of the first defense line, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji stood to the left and right, their expressions extremely grave. On the other end of the battlefield, beneath the black banner of flame, the governor of war, Kateba, was riding his massive warhorse, his golden halo shrouding him. But as the silver weapons advanced, a sharp and cold light flashed through Kateba's eyes. As the governor of Arabia, Kateba had spent almost his entire life at war. In his life, he had encountered all sorts of opponents and all sorts of defensive measures. Tall walls, sturdy fortresses, layers of heavy shields, and all sorts of familiar and unfamiliar, strange and ordinary war machines. In the face of Arabia and the governor of war, Kateba's edge, many opponents had chosen to defend, hoping to wear down the Arabs in a defensive battle, just like the Tang. But in the end, not a single faction or empire had been able to survive against the battle-hardened Kateba. Kateba had found a way to deal with any tactic or opponent. To deal with those defensive opponents who refused to come out, Kateba had ordered the imperial craftsmen to build a special kind of siege weapon, the silver behemoths. In other words, these huge silver-white war machines in front of them rumble. In the disturbing noises, the enormous silver machines were getting closer and closer to the iron defense line under the cover of the army. Finally, boom! After an earth-shattering noise, if one were to look down from the sky, they would be able to see an enormous rectangular iron hammer dashing out of the silver machines like a tongue. Under the effect of the heavy machinery, it carried a terrifying force and fiercely crashed into a steel wall in front of it. A moment later, all the Tang dynasty soldiers felt their breath stop. The previously incomparably heavy and indestructible steel wall suddenly trembled and was instantly sent flying by a tremendous force. Even the shield bearers and spear bearers behind them were sent flying into the sky like pieces of paper. After drawing an arc in the air, they fell heavily into the army more than 200 feet away. Boom boom boom. One silver weapon after another moved to stand in front of the steel walls, and one mallet after another shot out. In the blink of an eye, the silver behemoths that Kateba had brought with him from the north had sent one steel wall after another flying into the air like pieces of paper. Chapter 1067. Siege Weapons. Short-range siege weapons. They had a shorter range than catapults, but they were many times more powerful and sturdy. And with the assault of these silver behemoths, the Tang dynasty's defense line was instantly left with an irreparable gap. Kyle! Fierce shouts rang out as the Arab cavalry charged through the gap, their faces savage and ferocious. Kill them! Countless Arabs had savage expressions on their faces as they madly charged into the Tang camp. The terrifying power of cavalry and the ferocity of the Arabs were on full display at this moment. Bang bang bang! One Tang dynasty soldier after another was sent flying into the air, like a string being cut from a string. The short gap quickly turned into a huge mess. Under the relentless assault of the Arabs, the gap continued to widen, and the shockwaves spread to a much larger area. Hold! Don't let them get in! Stop them! If we let them get in, we'll lose! Kyle! Everyone follow me! Seeing this scene, everyone became anxious. The eyes of the shield-bearers, axemen, spearmen, and mercenaries nearby turned red. They roared and charged toward the gap. But it was too late. The hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry had been charging at the first defense line for a long time, and now, they had finally found a vent, releasing all their pressure. Screams filled the air as soldier after soldier fell in the face of the Arab charge. Even in the moment of death, they were still doing their utmost to charge forward. But their individual strength was far too limited. In the face of wave after wave of the Arabs, they were like ants trying to shake a tree, incapable of holding on. Iron Wall Army, get ready! Gao Xinji immediately unsheathed his sword. With his order, the 4,000 Iron Wall Army soldiers quickly assembled, their bodies exploding with a powerful aura as they aimed their eyes at the gap. The collapse was already taking shape. Ordinary soldiers could not stop the Arab flood of steel. If they wanted to plug this gap, they could only rely on the Iron Wall Army. Attack! Gao Xianji pointed his sword, and the 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army strode forward, their gazes resolute as they charged toward the gap. Clang! When they reached the gap, all the soldiers of the Iron Wall Army drew their swords in unison. The 4,000 swords vibrated in unison, forming an intimidating pressure. Kill them all! The leading Iron Wall Army soldier's eyes flashed with cold light as he swung his sword and led the rest of the Iron Wall Army like a tiger charging into a flock of sheep. Swish! The leading Iron Wall Army soldier swung his sword, the tip of his sword piercing through the Arab horseman's back and emerging from his back. Bang! With a flick of his wrist, the Iron Wall Army soldier threw the Arab horseman and his horse into the air. This man and his horse, together with their armor, weighed nearly 1,000 jin, but the Iron Wall Army soldier's sword seemed as light as a feather. With a single swing, they were sent flying 7 or 8 zhang away, knocking away a large number of Arab cavalry. Boom! After killing the first Arab horseman, the Iron Wall Army soldier strode forward, stabbing his sword into another Arab horseman. Boom, boom, boom. One step after another, the Iron Wall Army soldier strode forward, his footsteps firm and firm. Plush! Plush! Blood gushed into the air as the Iron Wall Army soldier slashed out with his sword, killing a man with each step. Massive booms could be heard as more and more Arab cavalry were cut down like weeds. Not a single one of these Arab cavalry was able to stop the advance of the Iron Wall Army. Bum bum bum. When more than 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army advanced together and killed together, their momentum was overwhelming and unstoppable. Nay! The panicked whinnies of the warhorses rang out. In the face of the terrifying and cruel aura of the 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army, even the well-trained and fearless Arab warhorses felt a sense of dread, neighing in fear as they attempted to flee from these fearsome Iron Wall Army soldiers. Bum bum bum. The 4,000 Iron Wall Army soldiers continued to advance with terrifying speed. No matter how many Arab cavalry charged at them, they were unable to stop their momentum. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. These famed Arab cavalry were unable to take a single blow from the Iron Wall Army. Their corpses piled up into mountains across the battlefield. Kill them! The first to notice this sight was the Crimson Moon Vanguard. A horseman of the Crimson Moon Vanguard swung his scimitar at the Iron Wall Army soldiers in front of him. Kill! The massive scimitar left a long scar in the air. The savage faces of the Crimson Moon Vanguard reflected on its scarlet surface. The Crimson Moon Vanguard was an experienced warrior who had slain countless formidable foes. He had put all his strength into this crimson leap. Even steel would be split apart by this scimitar, let alone flesh and blood. But in the face of this mountain-sundering attack, the Iron Wall Army soldier stood straight like a rock, his cold and aloof face devoid of emotion. His callous eyes glanced at the Crimson Moon Vanguard, and then he thrust his sword forward. Swish! The sharp tip of the sword pierced through the warhorse, through the Crimson Moon Vanguard, and out his back. Time seemed to stop, and the massive scimitar could no longer continue. One man and one horse, weighing more than 1,000 jin, were held in the air by a sword, unable to move. How could this be? How could there be such a powerful warrior in the Eastern world? The Crimson Moon Vanguard soldier's eyes went round in disbelief. At the moment before his death, he had felt a deep chill in his heart. After conquering so many factions and killing so many foes, for the first time, he had learned that there was a warrior in the world so skilled in killing. Before he could fully execute his Crimson Moon Slash, his opponent had struck his vitals. This strike was clean and precise, without any unnecessary movement. It was so terrifying that it would plunge one into a nightmare. Rumble! The 4,000 Iron Wall Army soldiers charged forward with unstoppable momentum, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake as the Crimson Moon Vanguard was completely wiped out. "Craftsmen, get ready to mend the gap." A loud voice resounded over the first defense line, and then a creaking sound could be heard from the battlefield. Complicated mechanical arms, operated by countless craftsmen, swiftly moved to the front of the defense line, lifting steel walls weighing tens of thousands of jin. Boom! The steel walls dropped down, long spikes stabbing into the earth. In the blink of an eye, a new steel wall had appeared, and then a second, a third. During this entire process, the 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army stood in a straight line, blocking the gap and blocking the heavy attacks of the army. No matter how many Arab soldiers charged at them, these 4,000 soldiers remained steadfast. The morale of the Iron Wall Army was instantly boosted, and the shieldmen, axemen, sabremen, and spearmen began to gather and establish a new defense line. "All Wuxian cavalry, hear my order. Move out at any moment." Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Wang Chong, mounted on the white hoof shadow, coldly stared at the silver war machines behind the first defense line. After destroying the first steel city wall, these huge silver-white war machines were moving rapidly under the cover of the army, heading towards the steel defense line in other directions. Although the Iron Wall Army was powerful, if they did not deal with these silver war machines, the danger would still exist. The tens of thousands of Arab soldiers would still be able to charge in through these gaps. Boom! Just when the several hundred war machines were about to reach a new section of the steel wall, Li Sai's eyes flashed with cold light as he unsheathed the sword on his back and took the lead, charging through the gap and into the vast sea of Arab soldiers. 10 charges, 10 victories. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Sai led several thousand of his elite Wuxian cavalry in unleashing one of the 10 most powerful formations of the apocalyptic world. 10 charges, 10 victories was originally an array formation used to deal with this kind of vast sea of opponents that far outnumbered one's own. Hong long long, there was a series of earth-shattering booms, and it was as if the entire world was being torn apart. The 4,000 Wuxian cavalry exploded with an enormous momentum that completely suppressed the hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry on the front line. Ah! Screams filled the air as halos clashed with halos, swords clashed with swords, and warhorses collided with warhorses. Whether it was the elite soldiers Qutayba had brought from the northern war zone, Abu Muslim's soldiers, or even Governor Osman's soldiers, the 4,000 Wuxian cavalry instantly crumbled. No one could stop them. Huang Batian, take some people to stop those Arab soldiers. Kong Xian, you take some people to destroy those silver war machines. With Li Sai's order, the 4,000 Wuxian cavalry divided into 2 groups to carry out the mission. Bang bang bang. The 4,000 Wuxian cavalry turned around and charged at one of the silver war machines. Wherever the swords passed, countless Arab cavalry screamed as their horses were sent flying more than 100 feet away. Their exquisite Arab scimitars snapped in the face of the Wuxia steel weapons. Many of the Arab cavalry didn't even have time to react. All they saw was a flash of cold light, the sound of armor being torn apart, and then they vomited blood. When they looked down, they realized that the blood had come from their chests, and then their vision darkened as they dropped to the ground. Chapter 1068. The wind began to howl. The situation was urgent, and Kong Xian had no time to say anything. He unsheathed his wood steel sword and slashed at the exposed mechanisms of the silver weapons. Clang! Kong Xian's all-out attack was only able to leave a gap of around an inch on the surface of the silver weapons. These were the behemoths that Qutayba had brought from the northern battlefield. They had been thoroughly tempered and fused with many precious materials. Moreover, they had been imbued with thousands of defensive and toughening inscriptions, making them unimaginably tough. Not even the attacks of the Tang dynasty ballistae could effectively harm them. This was also why Kong Xian had decided to circle around the body of the carriage and attack the weakest of the exposed mechanisms. Clang! As Kong Xian pulled out his sword, another Wuxia steel sword slashed down, leaving behind a shallow wound on the exposed mechanism. Then came a third, fourth, fifth. Hundreds of Wuxia steel swords slashed down, and in just a few seconds, the exposed mechanisms of the silver behemoths had been shattered. Kang Xian's group swung down a few more times, destroying the crucial components of the silver mechanisms. Let's go! Kang Xian's eyes flashed with cold light as he lunged at a second silver weapon. In just a few seconds, this silver weapon had been destroyed. Kill! The Arab cavalry panicked at the sight of the silver war machine being attacked, and they began to rush forward in a frenzy. But none of them were a match for the power of the 10 charges 10 victories. The more ferocious their charge, the faster they would fall. Boom boom boom. Kang Xian's group was like a whirlwind, constantly attacking the silver weapons. 1-2. In a few short moments, more than half of the silver weapons had been destroyed. Kang Xian's group moved with incredible speed, spending only a brief moment in front of each of the silver weapons. Moreover, with more than 2,000 soldiers divided into 60-some groups, their momentum was so overwhelming that not even the Arabs could save them. In just a few moments, several hundred silver weapons had been destroyed, their surroundings littered with corpses. In this whirlwind charge, the 4,000 Wuxian cavalry had killed more than 9,000 Arab cavalry, all of them elites. Kill them! The 4,000 Wuxian cavalry charged through the sea of Arab cavalry a few more times, wreaking havoc and carpeting the ground with blood. Finally, they turned around and charged back behind the first defense line. Not a single person injured. How was it? A voice came from behind the defense line. But Wang Chong didn't even turn his head. Too powerful. Li Sai gave a long sigh, his breathing somewhat ragged. Behind him, the 4,000 Wuxian cavalry were also a little pale as they gasped for breath. Although the 4,000 Wuxian cavalry had been completely unscathed, the energy they had expended was unimaginable. A whirlwind-like charge back and forth, the amount of stamina consumed was comparable to a regular battle. The overall strength of this wave of Arabs is much higher than before. All of them are elites. Their training, techniques, martial arts, proficiency with their weapons, the halos under their feet, and their coordination with each other are all far superior to the soldiers under Abu Muslim's command. Li Sai knew what Wang Chong was asking and sternly said. As a top-class general who had spent time in the Biting Protectorate, Li Sai had a sharp eye and an extremely accurate judgment of his opponents. This battle had seemed glorious. A whirlwind of slaughter that had destroyed several hundred silver war machines and easily killed more than 9,000 Great Tang elites while completely unscathed. But only people like Li Sai, who had been on the front lines of the enemy formation, knew the ferocity and intensity of this battle. With just our 60,000 soldiers, I'm afraid that we won't be able to last very long. Li Sai hesitated for a very long time before finally saying this. The difference in numbers between the two sides was far too obvious. Moreover, the Arabs had brought no ordinary soldiers but elite soldiers. Even the Wuxian cavalry had consumed a great deal of energy to charge back and forth, let alone the others. Wang Chong said nothing, but his heart sank. Li Sai was the kind of person who wouldn't give up easily even if his opponent was very strong. He wouldn't say something like, "It's hard to hold on for too long." If he said something like that, it could only mean one thing. The real situation was much more serious than what he said. The disparity in numbers was still a problem that the Tang dynasty could not overcome. Withdraw and rest well. I will call for you in a little while, Wang Chong ordered. Yes, Marquis, Li Sai deferentially replied. Li Sai didn't even have the time to meditate. He sat on the tall Fergana horse, closed his eyes, and quickly began to adjust his breathing. Waves of hot white steam quickly rose from all parts of his body, and the aura within Li Sai's body also slowly recovered. The battle was extremely intense, and the first defense line was under unimaginable pressure at every moment. Li Sai and the Wuxian cavalry simply did not have enough time to rest. The more than 4,000 soldiers had to be ready to enter the battlefield at any time. My lord, do we need to join the Mo Saber unit? The King Gonka, mounted on his white and black spotted steed, suddenly asked. For more than a month, the King Gonka, Shi Yuanqing, and Lu Shi had been training the Mo Saber unit. This was a new unit, a new type of soldier, and also a powerful one. Most importantly, There were 10,000 of them, and they were the best weapon to deal with such a large number of people and an ocean-like charge. The Wuxian cavalry had already entered the field, as had the Iron Wall army. Only the equally powerful Mo Saber unit had yet to enter the field. Now is not the time. Wang Chong shook his head, his expression solemn and grave as he gazed at the 4 black banners fluttering in the distance. The Arabs still haven't sent any of their most powerful soldiers. Governor Osman of Cairo's strongest army hasn't moved. Abu Muslim's strongest army hasn't moved. And the Mamelukes haven't moved. In addition, not a single one of their 5 commanders has moved. The situation on the front line was extremely dangerous. Even those heavy steel walls that should have been impossible to move were fiercely swaying and on the verge of collapse. Whether it was Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Gao Xianji, or Cheng Qianli, any one of them could drastically change the situation of the army. But the 4 of them did not dare to act rashly. 3 Arab governors, 1 deputy governor, and the Mamluk commander. Not a single one of these 5 great generals had moved. If low-level soldiers were to waste their strength in battle, it would be like exposing one's back to a large beast, revealing one's weakness. The result was certain to be a destructive blow. The battles between armies were important, but the battles between great generals were the crucial factor. Whoosh! On the other end of the battlefield, far away from the first defense line, 4 massive black banners fluttered in the wind, but beneath these banners, there was only silence. This place was like a completely different world from the shouts and fighting on the front line. This was the first time the army other than Abu Muslim had experienced the power of the Eastern world, the power of the Eastern Song Mountains. In a few short moments, this empire called the Tang Dynasty had dispatched at least 2 powerful armies, using their overwhelming advantage to kill many of the elite Arab warriors. At this moment, they finally understood why the illustrious governor of Iron and Blood had been defeated by the Tang Dynasty. At the very least, this eastern army of the Tang people was not as weak as they had imagined. "My lord, should we send out the Beheader army? Our opponents are extremely powerful. Only the Beheader army will be able to contend against them." Behind Governor Osman of Cairo, a deputy general suddenly urged his horse forward and said, "The Beheader army was the god of the Nile River, a legendary crocodile of the Nile. As the governor of Cairo, the most powerful troop under Osman's command was named after decapitation. This group of soldiers had followed Osman to fight all over the place, continuously winning in wars of blood and fire. Although they were few in number, they were extremely experienced, and their strength far surpassed the other soldiers." In the conquest of the Sassanid dynasty, Osman's Beheader army had been the backbone of the army, making great contributions in sweeping away the powerful Sassanid Empire. The enemy's 4,000-foot soldiers possessed extraordinary strength. Of Osman's subordinates, only the Beheader army could deal with them. "Since that's the case, leave the Eastern Wuxian cavalry to me," Mamluk commander Ibak coldly sneered as he rode forward. He cared little for the Anchi Iron Wall army. What he truly cared about was the Wuxian cavalry led by Li Sai. "I believe that the Mamelukes and I will be more than happy to tear them to shreds." Ibak's lips curled into a cruel smile. These Eastern Wuxian cavalry had used a whirlwind style to destroy many Tang elites, demonstrating their strength and the right to stand against the Mamelukes. Ibak's eyes shone with intense interest. "Ziad, get ready." On the other side, beneath the scimitar of black flames, Abu Muslim suddenly turned his head to Ziad, his expression solemn. The Tang dynasty had already mobilized the Iron Wall army and the Wuxian cavalry. Ordinary elite soldiers would not be able to stop them. The Arabs would also have to mobilize their strongest armies in the rear. Just like how Gao Xianji had cultivated an extremely powerful Iron Wall army through his many years of campaigning, Abu Muslim had a powerful army serving as the core of his army. There's no need. Chapter 1069. He lightly squeezed his legs together, and the golden-armored 2-meter-tall Arabian steed, Victor, immediately took 2 steps forward and stood out from the rest of the group. Buzz! In an instant, the surroundings were deathly silent. The hearts of the three of them shook as they gazed at the figure that was tall and sturdy like a god. But none of them spoke. Too slow. Dealing with the trifling Tang dynasty takes far too much time. That magnetic voice rang out above everyone's heads. Boom! Before anyone could react, there was a flash of light, and the earth quaked. That golden, godlike figure had already flipped off the horse's back and landed on the ground. In that instant, the three of them were stunned. They stared blankly at the dazzling figure, and a hint of awe appeared in their eyes. Kateba, you! Governor Osman opened his mouth to speak, but just when he was about to speak, a gust of wind stirred up. Before Osman could react, the governor of war, Kateba, who had remained motionless this entire time, suddenly strode forward, his back ramrod straight. His expression was relaxed, and he appeared to be slowly walking forward. But his true speed was faster than a galloping horse. When he dismounted, he was only a few steps away, but by the time Osman called out to him, Kateba was already more than 300 feet away. Before Osman could finish speaking, Kateba's figure had already vanished into the vast sea of soldiers. From a distance, all one could see was a dazzling streak of golden light moving in a straight line toward Talas, toward the first defense line of the Tang people. Governor Osman stared at Kateba's back in shock, his hands still hanging in the air. For a moment he was at a loss for words. There's no need to call him. This madman's fighting style is completely different from ours. Ibak called out from the side, a bright light in his eyes. A commander would never lightly step onto the battlefield. If the commander had to step onto the battlefield in every battle, what was the point of soldiers? The commander-in-chief was more used to strategize, command and dispatch, observe the opponent's flaws, and search for the right opportunity. He was not the vanguard. Furthermore, once the commander-in-chief took action and personally arrived on the battlefield, it usually meant that the battle had reached the final moment to decide the victor. This was a rule that all the generals in both the East and the West adhered to. But Kateba's fighting style was completely different. He had long ago heard that Kateba liked to take the lead in battle. Alone, he would lead his army and use his overwhelming strength to open a gap, destroy the enemy, and slay the enemy commander, ending the battle like a bolt of lightning. But hearing about it was one thing, and actually seeing it and experiencing it was another. The Tang dynasty had only sent out 2 armies, and none of the commanders had moved. On the Arab side, the Mamelukes had not entered the field, nor had Osman, Abu Muslim, and Ibak, the other elite imperial great generals. The battle had not even reached its climax, but the governor of war, Kateba, could no longer hold back and had moved ahead of time. This left the 3 illustrious Arab governors and commanders dumbfounded, and they found it somewhat difficult to adapt to this situation. Why did Lord Kateba intervene? My lords, let's go as well. These Eastern Tang people are much stronger than we imagined, and they also have 4 elite imperial great generals. If Lord Kateba is alone, he might be at a disadvantage. Ziad finally couldn't help but break the silence as he stared at the distant Kateba. Governor Osman, Mamluk commander Ibak, and the highest commander of the Arab Eastern War Zone, Abu Muslim, quietly stood there, their backs straight as if they were rooted to the ground. None of them moved an inch. Ziad was dumbfounded by this sight. Ziad, there's no need. Kateba is different from the other governors, you know. In the end, it was Abu Muslim who spoke. His expression was calm, and he looked straight ahead without turning his head. When he personally goes into battle, he doesn't like other people interfering. If we intervene at this time, not only will he not appreciate our kindness, he'll even take it out on us. I don't want to get into a conflict with him at a time like this. In addition, don't think that the governor of war is too weak. For Abu Muslim's sake, Ibak also spoke up. Just like Abu Muslim, he looked forward without turning his head. Although the other side has 4 great generals, if they were to face Kateba, it's really not certain who would win. In this world, there really aren't many people who can make Kateba suffer a loss. Beneath the black banner of the Nile, Governor Osman gave a slight nod, clearly agreeing with Ibak's view. As the Arabian war god, and one of the strongest governors, Qutaybah's way of doing things and speaking made all the other governors extremely displeased. But even those who disliked him had to admit that Qutaybah's arrogance and maverick were backed by his indisputable strength. Thus, even though Qutaybah had interrupted Ibak and ridiculed Abu Muslim, these two powerful Arab commanders had no complaints, much less retort. In the Arabian Empire, where strength reigned supreme, strength meant everything. As the governor of war, Qutaybah had the right to be arrogant. Under the banner, Ziyad looked at the solemn expressions on the faces of the commanders around him, and then at Qutaybah's back. In the end, he was speechless. Although Qutaybah said there's no need, he's still here to help us. Ziyad, send out my Ironblood army, Abu Muslim said. Since that's the case, Rahman, send out our Beheaded army as well. I presume that Qutaybah won't mind our help in this way. Cairo's governor Osman also spoke. He and Abu Muslim had been friends for many years, and had fought side by side on many illustrious feats. As long as the two stood together, they would advance and retreat together at any time. Yes, my lord, Ziyad rejoiced, bowed, and then swiftly withdrew. Putting aside what was happening in the rear, the governor of war's Qutaybah's intervention on the front line had caused an irreversible change in the course of the battle. Bang! This simple step caused the earth to sway and dust to fly into the air. No one could describe the power erupting from Qutaybah's body. The entire battlefield trembled and buzzed, as if it couldn't endure his dreadful might. Qutaybah's body was covered in thick golden armor that exuded a light brighter than the sun. He was like a god walking the mortal battlefield. Huh! Qutaybah's eyes flashed like lightning, piercing through space to lock onto the distant Tang dynasty defense line. Bzzz. Before the soldiers could react, Qutaybah had vanished from their sight. When he reappeared, he was several dozen feet away. Bang! The earth quaked as Qutaybah took another step, and in a flash of light, he appeared even farther away. He seemed to be moving slowly, but in reality, he was incredibly fast. With each flash, he was much closer to the first defense line. In just a few moments, he had left thousands of soldiers behind. When he was still 200-some feet from the first defense line, Qutaybah suddenly stopped. Clang! With one dragon roar after another, Qutaybah reached behind his back and pulled out that famed golden divine sword of the Arabian Empire that had killed countless experts and struck fear into the hearts of countless empires. God's might. In a flash, the golden light around Qutaybah's body swelled to several dozen times its original size, transforming into a thick golden flame that soared into the heavens. Even space itself began to distort. Marquis! A voice suddenly rang out. Xue Qinjuan's eyes widened as he stared at that golden figure at the front of the army. For some reason, this figure made Xue Qinjuan's heart thump in fear and unease. At the same time, Wang Chong also noticed that distant figure. Roar! Almost at the same time, there was an earth-shattering roar. Boundless halos of energy burst forth and gathered on a single person. As everyone watched, Wang Yan's body suddenly rose from the ground and rapidly swelled, transforming into an enormous golden armored god. The mighty miracle god. Wang Yan clearly sensed the danger and immediately used the power of the formation. In the blink of an eye, he broke into the great general level. At this moment, 20 feet away, amidst the thousands of Arab cavalry, Qutaybah began to move. His eyes flashed with cold light as he thrust his golden sword, God's might, into the ground. Rumble! Qutaybah first appeared 20 feet away, but by the time everyone could see him again, he was already in front of the defense line, his golden sword, God's might, thrusting it into the ground. There was a heaven-shaking boom as golden flames seeped into the ground. With Qutaybah as the boundary, all the steel walls and the Tang dynasty soldiers, in a 1,000-meter radius, around him were blown several dozen li into the air by a terrifying energy. Thick smoke billowed and dust filled the sky. At that moment, the huge sound even overshadowed all the fighting on the battlefield. The originally fierce battlefield suddenly became much quieter. On the west side of Talas, beneath the 4 black war banners, even though they had mentally prepared themselves, Abu Muslim, Osman, and Ibak couldn't help but widen their eyes in shock. With a single strike of his sword, The governor of war had left a massive gap, more than 2,000 meters long in the impenetrable defense line of the Tang dynasty. This attack had far surpassed the power of the several hundred silver war machines, and it had opened a path for the army in the rear that was nigh impossible to close. This attack had completely altered the structure of the battlefield. Not only that, even though his attack had caused massive destruction, everyone sensed that Qutayba had not used his full strength in this attack. 700 feet and more than 400 steel walls, each weighing 10,000 jin. Qutayba is actually this powerful. Chapter 1070. Ziyad had never met the governor of war in his life, and his understanding of him was limited to legends. However, the governor of Iron and Blood, Abu Muslim, had met him several times in front of the caliph. When he thought of his previous proposal, Ziyad suddenly understood why Abu Muslim, Osman, and Mamluk leader Ibak were so indifferent. Qutayba's strength had already surpassed the imagination of mortals. When a person reached a certain level of strength, they were confident in controlling the battlefield and didn't need the help of others. In the distance, Ziyad's group was far more shocked than anyone could imagine. As one of the 4 commanders of Talas, Wang Yan had also never imagined that this barbarian general of the Western Kingdom would possess such terrifying strength. Barbarian of the West, hand over your life. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, an earth-shattering roar rang out. Before the billowing smoke and dust had even dissipated, Wang Yan, who had transformed into the mighty miracle god, roared and took the initiative to attack. Bang! Winds howled through the air, and in a flash of light, a steely fist the size of a mountain, suffused with immense power, smashed toward the steel walls of Qutayba. But a moment later, clang! The droning of a sword once more resounded over the front lines. At that moment, even time seemed to have stopped. Buzz! Qutayba's eyes flashed with cold light as he gripped the golden sword god's might with both hands and swung it at the mighty miracle god. Bang! In a flash of light in front of the first defense line, Qutayba's figure vanished from the ground. When he reappeared, he was in front of the mighty miracle god, his sword slashing at the mighty miracle god's body. Rumble! The earth quaked and the heavens swayed. Under countless incredulous gazes, the mighty miracle god's massive body seemed to be struck by Qutayba's casual strike. His massive body was thrown into the air like a severed kite, crashing into the army several thousand feet away. Ah! There was a heaven-shaking boom and countless screams, as the hundreds of Tang dynasty soldiers behind the defense line were instantly pulverized by the mighty miracle god, their severed limbs flying through the air. And the enormous strength the governor of war had imbued the mighty miracle god's body, stirred up a cloud of dust, leaving the earth in ruins. In just 2 attacks, the first had completely broken through the Tang dynasty's defenses, and the second had used its overwhelming strength to thoroughly defeat a great general of the Tang dynasty. Qutayba's terrifying strength was on full display in these 2 attacks. Shock. Incomparable shock. The entire army was silent, all of them stunned by Qutayba's strength. And none of them had expected that Wang Yan and the mighty miracle god, who had gathered the strength of so many soldiers, would not even be able to take a single blow from the Arab governor. Father! Wang Chong's eyes went red at this sight. Before the battle, Wang Chong, Wang Yan Gao Xianji, and Qing Qianli had run simulations of the battle, and after the battle, each of them had been assigned a defensive region. But Wang Chong had never imagined that the Arab governor would be so powerful that he could heavily injure his father with a single blow. Stop! Wang Chong bellowed, gathering stellar energy under his feet as he lunged at the governor of war. Infidel of the East, die! The governor of war stood in the center of the battlefield, his eyes cold and his expression callous. Without the slightest hesitation, Qutayba gripped his sword with both hands and slashed at the fallen mighty miracle god. With Qutayba's terrifying strength, Wang Yan was doomed to die from this blow. Not good. Elder Fong and Elder Du were alarmed by this sight. As Qutayba leaped into the air and slashed down like a bolt of lightning, the 2 of them immediately lunged at him. Of Gao Xinji, Wang Chong, Cheng Qianli and Wang Yan was the weakest. Thus, before the battle, Elder Fang and Elder Du had assigned their expertise in formations to Wang Yan to assist him from the side. Unexpectedly, Elder Fang and Elder Du had become the two closest to Wang Yan and the ones most capable of saving him. Boom! 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 In the blink of an eye, Elder Fang and Elder Du soared into the air, and with a wave of their sleeves, the steel walls that Kateba had sent flying immediately began to rise from the ground. Under the control of the pair, these walls began to bombard the ground around Kateba like cannonballs. 1 wall, 2 walls, 3 walls, 4 walls. The two worked together, and in the blink of an eye, 8 massive steel walls had descended around Kateba, embedding themselves deep into the earth. Bzz. The moment the formation took shape, Kateba vanished in a flash of light. Wonderful. My lord, let's go. The two rejoiced and breathed sighs of relief as they swiftly lunged at the distant Wang Yan. The 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap was their most ancient formation technique, and they had relied on this technique to trap many formidable individuals, including Dian Mangpoch. At this moment, this formation had won Wang Yan a chance at survival. However, before the two of them could take more than a few steps forward, there was a sudden rumble, and the ground split open. The 4 symbols Yin-Yang Soul Trap that Fang and Du had set up behind them instantly shattered. Right in the middle of the formation, a terrifying sword chi split into 2 and flew out. With just a single strike, it immediately caught up to Fang Tian and Du Xing. The sword chi slashed down at the same time, and the expressions on the faces of the two instantly froze. They were split into 2 by the sword chi and fell to the ground. Elder Fang, Elder Du. Everyone's eyes went red at this sight. The 4,000 Wuxian cavalry in particular had their eyes bulging out of their sockets in rage. Elder Fang and Elder Du had extremely high statuses in Wuxian village, and they had watched many of the Wuxian cavalry grow up. No one had expected them to be killed on the battlefield like this. In a flash, countless Wuxian cavalry began to gallop in that direction. Jumping clowns! The governor of war, Kateba, gripped his sword with both hands as he stepped out of the formation. The formations of the East truly were special, but there was nothing that Kateba could not cleave apart with a single strike of his sword. Just when Kateba was preparing to continue his pursuit of Wang Yan and kill one of the enemy commanders, a shrill howl of grief and indignation came from above him. Die! Just as the voice rang in his ears, a huge Vajra energy pestle suddenly smashed down from above his head with the speed of a thunderbolt. Buzz! Kateba narrowed his eyes, a hint of surprise finally appearing on his face. This Tang Dynasty commander was clearly stronger than the Tang Dynasty commander he had defeated before. But Kateba quickly snorted and sneered. Bang! The massive Vajra pestle smashed into Kateba's body, but the expected scene of flesh and blood flying through the air did not occur. As everyone watched, the Vajra pestle that Wang Chong had unleashed in his God King Yama suddenly froze in place when it was still several feet from the ground. How could this be? Wang Chong, in his God King Yama form, looked down from above, and when he saw this sight, his mind was in turmoil. Wang Chong had put all his strength into this attack, but he had never imagined that Kateba would be able to completely block it. Humph! Kateba raised his head and stared at Wang Chong's Yama, a cruel smile in his eyes. At this moment, everyone could clearly see that Kateba had thrust his massive sword into the ground. He had only used the broad blade of his blade to block Wang Chong's dreadful attack. A moment later, Kateba pulled out his sword with both hands, unleashing a storm of energy that swept through the world. Bang! No one saw how Kateba had attacked. By the time they realized what had happened, all they saw was a massive wave of sword chi shrouded in golden light slashing at the God King Yama. Boom! Even with the protection of the karmic battle armor, Wang Chong's energy was still in turmoil, and his God King Yama was sent skidding through the air, his feet digging 2 deep furrows in the ground. Buzz! Kateba's eyes flashed with cold light, and just when he was about to pursue, he suddenly sensed something and raised his head. In a flash, his pitch-black eyes flashed with light, clearly reflecting 2 figures, one large and one small. Bang! Long before Kateba could strike, the sky darkened as a dreadful bolt of sword chi shot down from the heavens like a waterfall of stars. At the end of the sword chi, one could clearly see a figure. It was Gao Xianji. Wang Chong, I've come to help you. At almost the same moment that Gao Xianji attacked, a massive fist wrapped in tensome chains of stellar energy slammed into Kateba's body with the speed of a thunderbolt. Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli, the two commanders of the Anqi army, had also attacked. Rumble! Bolts of energy shot out in all directions as boundless stellar energy swept through the surroundings. This wave of energy was incredibly fierce, far more powerful than any of the previous ones, and the dust and energy engulfed Kateba's body. Whoosh! Chapter 1071. Bang! The tens of thousands of Arab cavalry in front of the first defense line exploded with cheers when they saw that dazzling golden light, an immovable godlike figure in the center of the battlefield. Kateba! 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 All the hundreds of thousands of elite Tang cavalry on the battlefield who saw this sight felt their blood boil with excitement. Rumble! With this momentum, the hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry surged through the gap that Kateba had opened. Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, and the others paled at this sight. Everyone hear my order. Attack! Gao Xianji's voice resounded over the battlefield. At the same time, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Chong, and Wang Yin all charged at Kateba, the Arab war god. Even though the Khorasani had described his power in detail in their letter, it was only when they actually clashed that Wang Chong and the others realized just how powerful he was. Ballista soldiers, fire. Aim for the gap. Mo saber soldiers, prepare to enter the field. Wang Chong's eyes were red, and his scalp felt like it was going to explode. For the first time, he sensed an unprecedented danger. But there was no time to think. Wang Chong immediately flew forward, joining forces with Gao Xianji and the others to attack Kateba. The Arab governor of war was the source of all this danger. If they didn't think of a way to kill him or stop him, then even if they managed to block the gap and kill the Arab cavalry charging in, they would not be able to change the situation. Boom! 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 Vajra pestle, stellar energy chains, sword chi, steel fists, all sorts of attacks rained down on Kateba. The combined strength of the four of them was enough to make anyone pale in fright, enough to make any great general flee 1,000 li. But the Arab governor of war was able to block all these attacks. Clang clang clang. The golden sword in Kateba's hand moved with incredible speed. Whether blocking, or slashing, none of the attacks managed to get close to his body. 1 against 4. Kateba still had the strength to counterattack. This terrifying power gave everyone an unprecedented shock, and the shock in Wang Chong's heart was greater than anyone else's. The Battle of Talas had changed many things. This was the first time in Wang Chong's life that he had clashed with the Arab governor of war. If he hadn't intervened in the Battle of Talas, Wang Chong would have never even heard of the name Kateba. Too strong. His strength had already surpassed the peak great general level and reached an even more subtle level. I didn't think that the Arabian Empire would have such a powerful opponent. At this moment, Wang Chong's heart rose and fell, and the degree of shock was indescribable. Marquis, we are here to help you. At the most intense moment of the battle, the thundering of hooves could be heard. On the other side, the 4,000 Wuxian cavalry were charging with astonishing speed toward the godlike figure of Kateba. Cutting formation. With a shout, the 4,000-some Wuxian cavalry immediately began to scatter into dozens of columns that scattered in every direction. The cutting formation was a branch of the 10 charges 10 victories formation, and it was a special formation used to deal with extremely powerful opponents. Stop! As the Wuxian cavalry galloped toward him, Wang Chong's eyes bulged in shock. Kateba was far stronger than he had imagined. An ordinary cutting formation would not be able to deal with him. The Wuxian cavalry were strong enough to deal with brigadier generals and even ordinary great generals. But Kateba's strength far surpassed this level. Even though Wang Chong had called out to stop him, it was too late. The deaths of elders Fang and Du had agitated all the Wuxian cavalry. their eyes red and their bodies seething with rage. Kill! Avenge the elders! Countless Wuxiang cavalry galloped forward with bloodshot eyes. Nay! As thousands of soldiers watched, one Wuxiang cavalry after another took to the air and charged toward Kataba. In a few short moments, 40 to 50 Wuxiang cavalry had charged toward Kataba. Buzz! Kataba was fighting 1 against 4 on the battlefield when he suddenly heard this neigh. His eyes flashed with cold light as he turned his head. Boom! Kataba hovered in the air, his other hand reaching out and aiming at the charging Wuxiang cavalry. In a flash, a vast sea of stellar energy surged out of Kataba's body and swept through the air. A second later, everyone was stunned by what they saw. Kataba held his sword with one hand to stop 4 great generals, while his other hand blocked the attacks of the Wuxiang cavalry. One Wuxiang cavalry after another rose into the air, but it was like they had charged into a swamp, frozen in the air by Kataba's terrifying stellar energy. 1, 2, 3 for several hundred Wuxiang cavalry were frozen in the air, unable to move. Hiss! Even his allies, Osman, Abu Muslim and Ibak, couldn't help but gasp at this sight. They knew that Kataba was strong, but none of them had expected him to be this strong. This was not something that could be described with just the word strong. Not even Abu Muslim, wearing the eye of the demon god, would be able to explode with such power. Although this fellow is arrogant, he's unbelievably strong. Osman looked into the distance, his mind reeling in shock. In the past, he had been somewhat unconvinced that Kataba had been called the Arab war god. But now, he had nothing to say. Absolute strength was the absolute truth. With his godly strength, Kataba had the right to be looked up to by anyone. Bang! At the same time, there was a massive boom in the distance. And in the blink of an eye, the Wuxiang horseman closest to Kataba was blown to smithereens through the chinks in his armor. That meteoric metal armor was twisted into a ball in Kataba's hands, and then a second, a third, a fourth. As countless people watched, more than 100 Wuxiang cavalry were pulverized, leaving behind empty shells of meteoric metal that floated in the air and clattered to the ground. Bastard! A thunderous roar shook the heavens and the earth. In that instant, there was a flash of light, and Li Sai leaped into the air atop the Fergana stallion. The giant Uzun sword in his hand slashed down, cutting into Kataba's thick stellar energy. Someone of Li Sai's strength should have never been able to threaten a powerful Arab war god like Kataba. But at this moment, Kataba was fighting 1 against 4, holding back 4 Tang dynasty great generals, while single-handedly holding back several hundred Wuxiang horsemen. He was using almost all of his strength, but Li Sai's appearance had completely shattered this balance. Like the last straw on the camel's back, the ripples began to spread out from Li Sai's giant sword. As for Li Sai's giant sword, it was like he was cutting a cake, slowly cutting through Kataba's thick stellar energy. Buzz! The governor of war, Kataba, who had remained calm and composed even if Mount Tai were to collapse, finally showed a slight tinge of emotion. Let me. Just when the governor of war was about to reach his limit, a massive metal axe appeared and slashed at Kataba's protective stellar energy with a momentum that seemed capable of cleaving apart the heavens. At this moment, the Gonka king finally joined the assault on the governor of war. Me too. Count me in. Let's see just how strong you are. In the blink of an eye, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, and the leader of the Farahan tribe, Banahan, leaped into the air like cannonballs and joined the battle. Kataba's face contorted, and he finally found it difficult to maintain his composure. Even though he was extremely strong, far stronger than Abu Muslim and the others, he could not endure the attacks of so many great generals and brigadier generals. Boom! Without the slightest hesitation, Kataba began to circulate all the stellar energy in his body, causing boundless energy to erupt from his body. Boom boom boom! With one heaven-shaking explosion after another, boundless waves of energy began to ripple out from Kataba's body. Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan Li Sai, Shi Yuanqing Lu Shi, and the others were all sent flying like ragdolls, crashing into the ground in a cloud of dust. At the same time, countless Wuxiang cavalry were sent flying along with their horses. In a flash, A radius of several hundred feet around Kataba was filled with figures. After sending so many experts flying, the golden light around the invincible war god Kataba had dimmed a little, and his face was a little pale. Although Kataba was called the war god, he was not a true god. Dealing with so many people at once had consumed a significant amount of stellar energy. Buzz! Kataba's eyes flashed with cold light as he gripped his sword with both hands and leaped into the air. Without the slightest hesitation, he slashed at Gao Xianji. Of the 4 commanders of the Tang dynasty, Kataba could tell at a glance that Gao Xianji was the strongest and the greatest threat. Unlike Abu Muslim and Osman, he had little interest in the weak. Only killing the strongest could arouse his interest. But while Kataba had moved quickly, Wang Chong had moved even faster. As Kataba leaped into the air, a figure suddenly rose from the ground, and before the figure had even arrived, a massive Vajra pestle was already thrusting toward Kataba. The god King Yama's massive body was an enormous advantage. No matter how fast Kataba was, he could not move as fast as a casual movement of the god King Yama. Buzz! You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.